Good evening. Welcome to the October 28th Village Board Work Session. Let's begin with the pledge. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. And so we do have a really interesting agenda tonight. But before we get into the meat of the agenda, I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues on the board for anyone who has any announcements or updates.
I'll start. So I wasn't able to make last Saturday's DPW event. So one of my colleagues who was able to go, eager to hear from them what the report was. But everything that I heard was that it was great. Really the biggest headline that I have that I want to share and really underscore, I know others will talk about voting, incredibly important. Please get out there and vote. The times have been extended, and I'm sure others will go into detail. But it's about coronavirus. So we're seeing the numbers go up week after week here in our community. Now they're in the 20s. And it's concerning to see those numbers increase. We remember the bad old days of March and April and May, and how stretched our resources were in order to care for people, and how difficult it was to be able to meet everyone's needs, how that impacted the businesses in our community. And now that school is open, how now that would impact that as well. So I get it more than anyone else, the difficulty of following the guidelines, the fatigue that comes with having to wear a mask and keep your distance, particularly from those you love. And now as we head into both the colder weather and the holidays. But I ask that you please lead by example, maintain the guidelines, because that is going to ensure that our community can be as open as possible with the businesses that we have, to be able to keep them as open as long as possible. And also for schools and just for not to mention the most vulnerable in our community, older folks or people with pre-existing conditions or comorbidities that may find themselves at higher risk because of those things. So please wear your mask, maintain your distance, wash your hands, and we're going to be able to get through this together. Thanks.
Thank you, Omar. Rika, you have unmuted. Bob, you have unmuted. Whoever wants to go, just go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna just jump in, Bob. I hope that's okay. Thank you, Omar. I think the super important about voting still lines there today. I thought that's all really great news. I'm hearing from friends around the country similar stories, so it's fantastic. And thanks to all those that decided to use it as an entertainment forum. Which has been actually fun to see some of those posts. So super important that everybody got a vote. For those of us that have kids who are over 18, remind your children, your grown children, to please go out and vote. I think the younger folks are now voting in a much bigger way than they did at the last election, which is a super positive sign. I can only double down on the COVID-19. My family is spread across 5 continents, and I'm going to tell you that in Europe that went before us, they're just closing down countries right now, and it's causing tremendous angst for people. Going through it the first time is one thing, going through it again is quite a different story altogether. But I think if we form a community of people who help each other, as we did in Ossining in the past, I think helping the elderly, helping people with groceries, making sure that no one is hungry, etc., which we really as a community did such an amazing job. We're going to have to double down again. So if there's a way that you can help, please think about it. I encourage people to not travel for the holidays. I know how hard that is. There's just Thanksgiving is the biggest family holiday in the US. Christmas is probably number 2. I know how difficult it is. I work in a community center, and there's a lot of conversation about family all the time. almost all the states are on the list of no-go zone. And then you have to really be very careful about quarantine for 2 weeks. It's a tough go when you are traveling. So please try not to. And Saturday, what an amazing day Saturday. I actually called the mayor and texted her and told her it's one of the best days I've ever had. Really, not as a trustee. I mean, just one of the best days. The lines, and all the people online voting. It was the first time since I've been a trustee that when people saw me, not one person in Ossining complained about their taxes. They had so many other things to talk about. Big day for me. So that it was great. But also we were in Market Square, helping to get out the vote. And we did go down to the site, what we call the DPW site. I did encourage people on the record there, please, 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 if you get a chance, go down and look at the site, see what we're talking about, write us, give us your opinions, bot@villageofossining.org. Please let us know what your thoughts are about what should go there, what shouldn't go there. Look at the pictures, they're posted up there. There's a QR code, go to that website, see what it's about. Input is super important. It's public space. It's a public property. It's not just a developer coming in. I thought the presentation was terrific. I had spoken to village manager actually earlier today, encouraging us to all think about follow-ups to that as far as public engagement. You know, it was a crazy day with everything that was going on. I think we would have gotten more people. There were people there, but we would have gotten more people. So we're thinking of next steps with public engagement is what I walked away with from that. And the presentation is on video. I saw it on YouTube last night. I just don't know. It came up on my Facebook page. So I don't know how to, maybe the village manager can tell you how to go directly to it. I guess it's on our website. I got it through Facebook. So encourage everybody to look at it and get involved and tell us what you like. And just a reminder that you're going to see more information about available spots on the many committees that we have. We have about a dozen of them. I don't know if the mayor is going to speak about that, but it's also on our website. There's some opportunities to get more involved in our community and let the elected officials and everybody else sort of determine the future of the community. And we look forward to that. I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Your turn, Bob.
Is it working now? Okay, now it's working. I got it. Stupid button. Yeah, I echo what Rika said. Saturday went well. It was a good question and answer hour of the concept of this developer. Public input is huge. And again, it is public land and we want that public input no matter what it is. You know, there's the, there is a email that will go directly to us, the four of us on the board, that we can answer or we can choose how we want to answer either one of us for this public input. And we are going to be exploring more options for this public input because it's very important that you have your public input. That's enough on DPW. We voted as a family yesterday. It was approximately 55 minutes waiting and it went very smooth. They had their operation very well set up. I got told 3 times to stay single file when I got in the building. You know, I didn't do well when I was a kid in school either. So my listening was, but you know, we got in there and we voted and it went well. So that's about all I have. Thank you.
That's a good lesson. You don't have to always follow directions when you're a kid, and you can still grow up to be a village trustee, Bob. Manny, did you have anything to add to the announcements tonight? All right, then I'll just round out our conversation with you know, the coronavirus. I'm very much watching those numbers. If you follow me on Facebook, you see I frequently will post the map for the today. Yesterday we were at 24. Today we're at 21. And in August, we were down in single digits. So this is definitely not the direction that we like to see, although I was glad we went from 24 to 21 instead of the other direction. But really, we're up in staying in the 20s, the low 20s for the last few weeks. That said, that is not unusual for the communities around Westchester. We've seen an uptick everywhere, as was mentioned. Pretty much the entire country is now on the quarantine list. And there are a lot of communities in Westchester that have higher numbers than you might expect at this time for active cases. I will say with kids in the school, I'm keenly aware of all of the communications that we get from the Ossining schools. They have been doing a really, been very proactive in communicating with us on any reports of anyone who has had contact with the schools. And I think they had to shut down one of the elementary schools for a day while they did, while they did contact tracing and identified what to do. But the numbers that we're seeing increasing, I just had a conversation with a teacher today who's also a parent. And her feeling was that, and this seems to be bearing out, that the numbers are going up, but that in the schools, they're actually doing a very good job at consistently enforcing the social distancing and the mask wearing. And you may have seen the county executive came out with a statement today supporting the schools in their requiring that everyone wear masks and maintain social distancing with few exceptions when you can sit down for a break and to eat when it's determined appropriate by the schools. So I'm glad to see that is happening. And we're all figuring this out together. Park School, kids who were going hybrid are now going to be able to go 5 days a week. That's a surprising direction for things to be going in, but I think it's reflective of the fact that while we're seeing the numbers going up overall, it's not during the school day that we're seeing the infections happen. So fingers crossed that continues to be the story we're able to tell. I also wanted to just mention that we have a really exciting program that's going to be launching in the next couple of weeks here in Ossining called Energy Smart Homes. We are working with Sustainable Westchester to do that, and that's something we're going to talk more about because the conversation with Suzie Ross and Green Ossining dovetails very nicely with that. But before we get into that, I will also mention that Sustainable Westchester has a commercial component to that as well. So if you're somebody who owns a building with 5 units or more of housing or any other commercial building, there are some really great opportunities because we are in the gas moratorium zone for Con Ed. Con Ed and NYSERDA have a lot of incentives out there for people to be able to save money on their energy bills. So as we are all always aware of our expenses, and ever more so this year, want to make sure that people are aware that there are opportunities, and because we are a Sustainable Westchester community, we have access to help in facilitating those opportunities. And yes, I will talk about the boards and committees. We announced it a week ago. We've gotten some applications. Thank you to everyone who responded to the initial call for people to apply for our boards and committees. And we now have an opening on almost every board and committee. Most of the time, the requirement is just simply that you're a community member. Sometimes there's a little bit more specific requirement. For example, on the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, there are some positions reserved just for tenants, some for landlords, and some for people who are neither landlords nor tenants. And we actually have a couple of openings on that council. So there are there's multiple positions available. So please, if you're interested in helping to support good landlord-tenant relations and healthy, safe communities for people to live and good relations between landlords and tenants, then please consider applying for that. There's also an opening on the Board of Ethics, and I believe it is an attorney that we need now. Is that right, Stuart? Yes, we need an attorney. So we need someone who's an attorney, and I'm not sure about the residency because we have some flexibility and I don't know where we are, but if you're an attorney and you're interested, you've got a great skill set. I'm sure we could put it to use somewhere. So please go ahead and go to the village website. You'll see there's an icon with a bunch of hands raised, or you can just go where it says boards and commissions, and there's information about all of the different boards and committees that are available. And there's an application right there online. And the fabulous Jamie Hoffman will be organizing all that information for us. And then we will be doing interviews with candidates. Usually the interviews, if it's a mayor or a board appointment, we'll do those with myself and one trustee. If it's a manager appointment, then Karen's office will reach out to the applicants. And the manager's appointments are a few of the land use boards: Planning Board, Zoning Board, and Historic Preservation Commission. And the last thing I'll say is next week at this time, we are going to get our first glimpse of the 2021 proposed budget. So I know that Karen has been working diligently with all of the department heads getting ready for this very exciting time of year. We get it. It used to be we'd all sit there on the dais and we'd be handed our big notebook, and they would just hand out the notebooks to all 5 of us at a time. And we wouldn't get to see it at all before the meeting. I think we'll have most of us, I think all of us are getting it virtually, and some of us are also going to get the hard copy. I don't know when, I can't imagine they're going to show up at our door. Oh no, actually we're in the community center. So anybody who's there, you'll still be able to hand it out to us, but we're not going to know very much of what's in it yet, other than the top lines that were shared last week with Dale. So I'm very excited to see it. And soon after that, we will begin our conversations where we look at every department and we talk about what is going to be in the 2021 budget. And again, the big news is we anticipate that the tax rate will go down for perhaps the first time in history, certainly in recent history. So we are very excited about that, but it's a much more complex conversation than that, and I look forward to delving into it with my colleagues in the next couple of weeks. So, Madam Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. I just want to inform you that if you would like to look at the video that was done, we filmed the whole DPW presentation on Saturday. The presentation, the question and answers, the quickest way to do it, there are many ways to get to it, but you can go on the village website and click on the YouTube icon and it will bring you to the video. And you can also get more information at dpwsite.com. But with that, on to our agenda. So tonight, first up, we're going to be joined by Suzie Ross, our chair of Green Ossining. And Suzie's here tonight to discuss the Cure 100, Communities United to Reduce Emissions 100%, working towards an emissions-free environment by 2040. And this initiative, she's coming to talk about this initiative and the possibility of creation of an Ossining chapter, Ossining 100. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Suzie Ross so that she can tell us about this great new initiative.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So I'm going to dive into this. I'm probably not going to take more than 15 minutes. If I start talking too fast, you can stop me. But before I get into it, I do want to thank the village very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. But also, if I talk to people who are doing similar things that I'm working on, whether it's the Earth Day Festival or not, I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of the collaboration and all the work that the village has supported, and the town as well. It's a very unique situation that we have, and I have so many people across the county that are very jealous of the relationship because we tend to do a lot of things together, and I can't find a single situation that or initiative that I've worked on that hasn't been supported by the village. So in advance of it, it's not actually bait for you to accept what I'm going to propose to you tonight, but it's really just an opportunity to say thank you. So let me quickly see if I can share my screen. Okay. Are you guys seeing my screen?
No, Jamie, you might need to make her a co-host, right? Or I could make her a co-host, actually. I have the power. Oh, you did.
I upgraded
try
her,
again.
but you should be
Try
able to.
Okay.
If you're not able to, Suzie, quickly email it to me and I'll put it up for you.
Okay, let's see.
She just made you a co-host, so I'm optimistic.
I might have to accept that. I just did a share screen. Did that work?
No.
No. Okay.
Can you try now?
I hope that by the time this pandemic is over with, we learn how to do this better, or maybe it's just me. Bear with me 1 second. Okay.
I have it in here saying that everyone can do it. That's a panelist, so you should be able to.
Yeah, no.
Okay, do you want to send it to me really quick and maybe begin talking and then I'll have it up?
Yeah, hang on 1 second. I'm afraid if I do that, because it is a PowerPoint.
Okay.
I'll try it right now. Hang on 1 second. I really apologize.
Well, I'll do a little tap dancing while Jamie and Suzie are figuring that out. So I will tell you that I had a conversation last week with Suzie and Dana Levenberg, because this is an initiative that would be village and town, and it had been my full intention to go through this process and make use of this online tool for my household before tonight, but I haven't. But I will say Dana did, and so I asked her questions about what her experience was, and I'm sure Suzie will get into that a little bit, but I don't want to steal her thunder. I could just tell you all of the high points, because it's not that complicated. It's not nearly as complicated as it's sharing the screen.
It is not, and they actually tell you just, you know what, you need a lot to avoid any frustration and to make this very seamless. You know, as we're Jamie, I just sent it to you, so hopefully you can.
Okay.
I know.
I don't have it just yet.
Okay.
Okay.
If I hit refresh over and over like a maniac, maybe it'll get faster. But the thing about this is it's an app, and we will talk about it, and I'll show you a couple screenshots. But it's an app, and it requires your household's own individual usage by a variety of different categories. They actually suggest that you just sit down for 45 minutes and they brief you about a couple of things that you'll need. And it really shouldn't take, I think Dana said hers took about 40 minutes or so. And so, but it is quite interesting, and it does tell a story. And I want to give, and I'll show you some of the steps through, and I'm really mad that I can't share my screen, but did you get it yet, Jamie?
I did, but I have to convert it to a PDF because of various other tech things.
Okay. Okay.
Give me a second.
I'm sorry, now you're not going to see pretty animations, but you'll get the picture. So while Jamie is bringing it up, I will start. You'll see this as it comes up. So Jamie, just give me a cue, because I've got my PowerPoint on my desktop that I'm going to start working off of, just to save some time.
It'll be about 30 seconds. It's just
okay.
It's on page 11 now.
All right. So the idea behind this actually is I want to give credit to friends of ours in Croton. You know, a lot of communities across Westchester County have been trying to create their own type of customized efforts that will work for their own community. Croton has a lot of technologically sophisticated and people who are very interested in climate change. And I also think it helps that a lot of people that are working on this are somewhat retired, so they have the time. But there's a lot of effort that was going on in Croton to create this carbon tracker. And Jamie, you said you're up?
I am. It's not working though, so give me just a second. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So just to brief you, part of the interest that I particularly and that Green Ossining had with this was, you know, some of you may have heard reference to something called the IPCC 1.5% degree. I want to just explain that briefly, because it's really important. It's not just important to understand that from the perspective of this particular initiative, but it is overall, because as we try to stop the planet from warming, we kind of have to understand a little bit about the climate science. And I'm not going into that. I'd love to be invited to give a 10-minute overview on climate science, but that's not for this evening. The IPC is basically the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it was created by the UN as a body to assess the science behind climate change. And what they came out to say in 2018 was that we need to limit global warming to 1.5% degrees above pre-industrial levels. That we don't want to go beyond that, because if we can stay under it, it will make our adaptation to a definitely warming planet less difficult, and it will make us suffer a lot less negative impacts. So it's not to say that life will be the same at 1.5, it's that we want to make sure that the way that our world will change will be by carbon reductions. And again, it's really to make our life more adaptable and less difficult in such things as biodiversity, ecosystems, resources, food security, things like that. And it's really just to create less of a negative impact on those things. And that includes the intensity and frequency of extreme climate events. In addition to that, some of you may have heard the acronym CLCPA, some of you have not. Most people don't know what that is, but in 2019, New York State passed the most aggressive climate legislation perhaps in the world, certainly within the United States. And it's called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And the importance behind that is the challenge and the charge really to cut carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, based off of what it was in 1990, and to be net zero by 2040. And effectively by 2040, New York State will switch to 100% carbon-free electricity. So there are all types of NYSERDA programs that are going on right now, but that then also kind of dovetails into what Victoria was talking about, which is the Energy Smart Homes, which will be launching in November. So these three things kind of coming together were sort of the impetus to get behind this particular effort and get our community a little bit more oriented around what their individual carbon emissions are, how they can track what their household's doing, and even suggestions about how to make certain steps to reduce those carbon emissions. Thank you. We're up now, right? I see. Okay, so I think we're one slide ahead.
Susie, your presentation keeps crashing my computer, so Jaime Martinez is going to try to put it up there from his computer.
Okay, so I'll just keep talking.
Here it is. Jaime is got it. Okay.
He's got it?
It looks like he does. Yes.
Okay. That looks like it. Thank you. Thank you, Jaime. So I think I'm on the second slide. Yes, thank you. So this is sort of a summary of what I was just talking about. These three particular events are really coinciding and really are the impetus behind my discussion with you this evening. So it's the IPCC limit of global warming to 1.5 degrees. It's the New York State CLCPA, which I just made reference to. And it is the Sustainable Westchester program that we are partnering with Briarcliff and Ossining for. And Jaime, you're doing this in PowerPoint? Yeah, okay, so you can advance. Now we're getting all the great animation that I was talking about. But it's really blowing it all for me. So just.
All right, let me know when I've arrived.
You've arrived. Next slide, please.
All right.
And just as an FYI, for those of you who are not aware, we've had two really successful campaigns, not including CCA, with Sustainable Westchester. We've had an Energize program. You're good at the one behind it, Jaime, just because that actually ties in. Yeah, so we've had the Solarize campaign, we've had the Energize campaign, and now this one, which is going to bring, which is really about how to insulate your home and protect it, and also to actually get off of fossil fuels in a much more efficient way. So more on that, because we'll, I think, launching in November, if I'm not mistaken, with the town and with Briarcliff. So going back to the IPCC challenge, which was to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, it's not really going to be something that we can easily do. It's going to require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of our society and within our community. Next slide, please. So, and thank you, this is it. So Croton 100, as I had mentioned, this is in partnership with Croton 100, who has done a stellar job of creating an organization really very quickly. It's very much like Green Ossining, but we're not a registered 501c3. And they are completely and 100% focused on reducing carbon emissions. And the Cure 100 that Karen made reference to, that's on the agenda, is an acronym for Communities United to Reduce Emissions by 100%. And how they do that, and how we will do that, is basically community action paired with data about carbon emissions by our particular zip code, by individual households. Next slide, please. So this is Croton 100's website. As you can see, they've actually done a really nice job at creating a place where people can go to get information. You'll notice the various different tabs, and they've all been populated. So they're kind of off and running. Next slide, please. And this is really, how do you get to, the whole point behind Croton 100 is to become 100% carbon free by 2040. You can hit it one more time, Jamie. And the whole idea is to seek to reduce emissions as a community with a 2020 baseline and 100% reduction by 2040 from the 2020 baseline. You can hit it one more time. So it's a 5% step down in emissions every single year until we get to 2040. And again, it's keeping with, this is how we can do it, by keeping to the urging of the United Nations goal of keeping us below 1.5%. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's data married with zip code. And I think you can go to the next, you can advance it once more. The way this is done is by zip code. I have the data on 10562 in aggregate. I have the data on 10510, and then for Ossining combined. And 91% is just that 91% of these, that's the Briarcliff PO. That's the Briarcliff zip code. And 91% of Briarcliff is in the Ossining, is under the town of Ossining. And so everything, all the data that we have was prorated on that. But this will give you information qualified down to community-wide emissions, emissions by household, individual emissions, emissions by sector, such as transportation and food, and then carbon reductions. And then I think there's one more point underneath that. And then it will provide you with actual guidance for each one of those 5% step downs. Next slide, please. So the purpose really of this carbon tracker is to really be able to provide a footprint calculation for the individual and for the community overall. It brings awareness to the contributions to that carbon footprint. And it does a whole bunch of other things, but I want to just kind of get to the app and get to the data because we've taken a lot of time here, because you'll be able to see effectively what it can do. But effectively, the most important thing is that it gives a household an understanding of where they are, where their carbon emissions are coming from, and then it ultimately gives suggestions on how to reduce them. And that, in a nutshell, really is the most powerful part about this carbon tracker. Next slide, please. So again, in order to log on, I think you can advance it once more. You would just basically go to this website, go to the carbon tracker tab. There's a little preparation. I've given some idea of what you have to do in order to get set up. You have to have, your Con Ed bill and a couple of things in order. And again, in just about 40 minutes or so, you'll be able to understand what your individual carbon footprint looks like. Next slide, please. So when you get there, you'll set up a profile, your address, a little, but enough to be able to provide an idea of what type of home you live in and the zip code that you're in. And then you'll see, I'm just showing you transportation, but it starts to ask questions about your vehicle usage. Then it asks about home heating, home electricity usage, food and waste based on how you recycle. And the goods and services and zip code overheads are really things that they imply. They don't really, there's not enough information right now to give you an accurate reading of what your individual household contributes. But things like buying things locally would affect those numbers. But again, it's a very simple questionnaire. Next page. Once you're done, this is basically what you would get from the carbon tracker, and it'll tell you where you are relative to what the region's numbers are. So you'll have a sense just from filling out this questionnaire how you perform in these particular areas. Next slide, please. You can advance it, yeah. Thank you. So this is 10562, just to give you a general idea. The population estimates are from it's called a Climate Cool. I think it's called Climate Cool. It's from Berkeley, and Berkeley puts a lot of information together. These numbers are fairly close to the 20, I think it was 20, is it 2010, the last census? I think it was, right? Yeah, it was 10 years ago. So these numbers, I was told, were very close to the 2010 census. It's basically saying that we have 11,000 households in 10562. Our population density is a little over 2,000 people per square mile. It gives a generalized view of our electricity household prorated per individual household. Arrows are up and down. We actually do quite well as 10562. But when you get down to the last 3 bullet points, our annual greenhouse gas emissions per household are up at 48 tons. So we're higher than the US. Happily, we're low for Westchester. The US average is about 20 tons, I believe. And then the greenhouse gas emissions, the last 2 bullets, it gives you per person per year and per day community-wide. So again, per person per year, we're actually about average for the US and lower for Westchester. And then the greenhouse gas emissions per day community-wide are just another metric to look at. Next slide, please. This gives you a general sense of all those categories that were in the questionnaire. You'll basically see where most of our greenhouse gases are coming from. It leads from transportation. That is our #1. And this, by the way, is individual travel. This is your own individual household traveling. So it's not, when we think of greenhouse gas emissions, sometimes we think about the fact that we're in the middle of 2, 9A and 9, that we are actually getting greenhouse gas emissions from transportation that are going through those corridors, and that is not actually it. It's much more about household usage here. Next slide, please. And this will give you the average annual household emissions. So again, equating to that 48.1 tons, it's showing you specifically where the categories of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. And the next one. And I just have a few more slides left. This is where you get the quantified step down. So again, you know what your individual household is, but what does that do for you if you don't know what to do with that type of information? Based on the questionnaire, your individual household information is put in here, and it's then you can advance. I believe there's a number of different, thank you, Jaime, sorry. Going. And I think there's one more advance. So again, this will give you an idea of, for example, if this household owned GMC Savannah, it'll give you an idea of how you step down and how you reduce your emissions by changing your vehicle. Next one. And this also, again, it'll ask you about airline travel. You can keep advancing. This is just going to give you an idea of the variety of different ways it can suggest you step down. Next, please. And you could keep going through. Next.
I think that's the most interesting slide actually for me.
The last one?
Yeah, the one on heating. Yeah, because I can see we have oil with B20 in our household, and it was so interesting that natural gas was the next one, because I've really, I have strong feelings about natural gas because it's not as simple as it was 20 years ago before fracking was a thing. So it's interesting that they add the greenhouse gas emissions downside to natural gas because of the leakage and the larger problems with the industry and stuff. That's why it just seems so interesting to me. But I'm sorry, continue. That's more of a broader question, but points out is good
because it actually speaks to the program that we're going to be launching too. I think it does help people also.
What was the one all the way to the right? Fully clean is because the electricity is fully 100% clean.
It was heat pumps, the one that was
heat pumps. Okay, heat pumps. Very good. So that's perfect. Okay, that's what we need. Thanks, Jaime.
That would be such a nice segue into.
Yeah, that's what the rest of this whole exciting initiative is about.
Yeah. I think next slide. Is that it? No. Okay. I think there's one more slide. No. Again, you can just advance this as quickly as you want. I just want everybody to get a sense of what the step downs are, because it'll basically give you an idea of what you can do. You know, and some of these things, it's very easy to say, do this. It'll be, you know, it'll be better for our community and better for you. And you know, some of these things are not suggestions of how to step down. But again, you can't change what you don't understand, and you can't make a change if you don't know what the data says. And once you have the data, it's very easy to determine what you are willing to do and what you can afford to do. But without that, you can't. You can just, you know, think about, but this really provides an individual household level of information. The next. So this program is actually being launched. It's been launched, and they are looking for partnerships, and Green Ossining does intend to partner with them. And we will become probably Ossining 100. Green Ossining will not change. It is just a chapter. So the way you could see the structure of it here, Bedford, it's actually Bedford 2030 now. Bedford 2030 and Yorktown 100 have basically licensed this carbon tracker. And there are a few others that are pending. There has been a lot of interest actually in California for this. So it's not a New York centric thing. It's not a Westchester centric thing. This will be something that they plan to roll out. I actually know that there is a chapter in India for this. So if you have a zip code, that's how all the data is created. And that's really all that's needed to make this thing take off. But what would be really wonderful would be the support of the municipality to be able to say that you stand behind this. And that type of statement really would be very meaningful. So it's something we'd like to do. And I think that's my last slide.
It is.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you so much. You're a very good slide advancer.
At least I can do some things right, you know, like that's my feature, a big feature.
You're starting off on a good foot for the night. Thanks, Jaime. Yeah, if we can go back to our faces. Thank you. So Suzie, before I open it up, because I'm sure my colleagues have questions, I just want to understand, because right now I'm not sure that I was clear on the ask, to establish ourselves as a chapter of Ossining 100. You know, do you need a resolution, or just be nice to have a resolution?
It'd be great to have a resolution. It's not necessary. It would be meaningful to, I think, to have that would be meaningful to anybody who joins on. And I will tell you, again, you know, to the statement that I made at the beginning, most communities are not fortunate to have the relationship that we have with both municipalities. And it is a unique one, and it's been a very good one. And we can go ahead whether we get a resolution or not. But the resolution to me and to Green Ossining would be meaningful, because to the community, it would mean that once again, you're supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in our community. And so it stands as a statement and a testament to how this community prioritizes these types of initiatives.
So then my only other question was, you showed us the website, like Croton's built this whole website for Croton 100, and you go to the Croton website and you click on it, and then you do your tracker from there. If somebody from Ossining, like when Dana did her thing, did she go to the Croton 100 website, or is there a QR? Okay. So is that how it would be going forward, or would we have an Ossining 100? Like,
no, it would just be under, it would just be under Green Ossining. So you go to our website and we would have a tab that would say Ossining 100. And
awesome.
it would look just like that.
Great. Well, then I'm sure my colleagues have other questions or comments, so I'm going to mute myself and hear what they have to say, because I've gotten asked more than my fair share.
No questions.
I'll go first. I just want to thank you, Suzie. This is really interesting and really important. There are, one of the things that this summer and this year has brought up is that people go, we're dealing with the twin issues of the pandemic and racial justice issues. But I think as people think about the wider spectrum of existential issues that we're facing, environmental catastrophe is right up there. And so if you were getting too much sleep, just read the literature and you'll find yourself getting much less. But taking steps like this, I think, really helped make a difference. So I appreciate your effort in this. I'm supportive 100%.
Thank you.
We're just trying to be polite because on Zoom, we don't want to jump in ahead of people. So it's always tricky on who speaks and doesn't. Thanks, Suzie. This is great. I did some traveling last year. Planned to do some this summer, but that didn't go well. And when you go to other parts of the world during bodies of water, I don't know if I shared with you, some bodies of water have already started warming up, changing fish life. And what struck me isn't just sort of, I think we were in Croatia, and we saw that the water has heated up and gone up and heated up at a degree, changing their entire fisheries, which is really awful for them. Brings in predatory animals, and this person was explaining it to us, just a regular tour guide. It wasn't like an environmental tour. It was, we were just getting a tour because his family were fishermen. And, my husband turned, and Mark, he turned to me and he said, so see, this is what people need to see. They see how people's lives are directly affected. It's not a political statement. It's not, an election buzzword. It's not happening somewhere else. Like when people's actual livelihoods, the way they eat, is happening right now, and they know it on the ground. So what I liked about this presentation, if I understood it correctly, I hope I did, is it seems like our friends in Croton, I hate not being first to things, so you guys need to step it up a little bit, but side comment. But so happy. I have a lot of friends in Croton. I know that work's been done. What's really exciting is that it sounds to me like this is an app that is very much about your home and about what you do every day, and that you could actually see the effect that environmental issues have in the present. And it's attempting to say, look, it's not a theory, and you don't have to believe in environmental causes or not believe in them. This is where you live, it's your everyday activity, and this is the effect it might have. And here's some measurable ways. It's like the 10,000 steps. You take 10,000 steps, you might get into better shape. And, it's simple because anybody can do it regardless of your socioeconomic level, etc. So I love how pragmatic this app seems to be heading to. We drive electric cars. We get asked all the time about, how does it work? And, what happens when you run out of electricity or whatever. It's so great that you guys have sort of found something that is measurable right in your home. Now, I assume it's like the envelope, it's the inside envelope of your home, of your household. Doesn't matter whether in what environment you're living in. It's just you as a family, as an individual, and how you use energy, right? And that's what you're measuring. And the data goes into some database somewhere and then spews back to you like, here are like the 5 things you can do, that might be of help to you. And you could actually start asking questions about it. Like, I'm not sure everybody understands, what kind of oil they use or not. This might be educational. So I'm sort of excited, being a pragmatic human being myself. Do you see any drawbacks of why somebody wouldn't do it, aside from education and understanding it? Is there data collection that maybe we need to think about? Like, do people, is there any downside that we should be aware of that you can think of, not an environmental one, but that an obstacle that prevents somebody from using it? Is it different for, like, if you're a renter and you say to your landlord, you should do this and that, would that prevent people from doing it? I'm just trying to think, like, what might we need to answer going forward that we're not thinking about, that you have heard about and we should be aware of?
It's a great question. There are not a lot of obstacles I can see. If there are people that are concerned about their personal information, it doesn't ask you Social Security, it doesn't ask you for your Con Ed bill, it just asks you for information from it, and it asks your address. And it asks, but it'll ask you how many children, you know, it has to incorporate features that allow it to calculate accuracy. And so the worst thing that I'm thinking of is that they put the data in incorrectly and it gives them an incorrect assessment of their greenhouse gas emissions. And then they're misled by that. But as far as their data and being proprietary, there are caveats to that, but there is a pledge that that information doesn't go anywhere. And it's really technically not terribly useful for a lot of people anyway, if they got it. Again, it's not your social security number or any other type of personal information other than pretty much information that's on public record. However, again, it will ask you your household size and the kind of car you drive. So, but it is individual. Like I could never personally see the individual's information. It's aggregated elsewhere. And that elsewhere is, you know, is on a server, you know, somewhere in the, I believe it's, I'm not actually sure who is responsible for managing that, but I will tell you it's a lot of retired IBM people that are behind this.
Well, that would make sense around here. And is this actually, is Croton 100 the first one to have it, or is this something?
Croton 100 created it. Yeah, Croton 100 created it. And in my opinion, it's, you know, I'm super excited about it because I do really think that knowledge, you know, knowledge is power. And, you know, this is not going to be of interest to everyone, but for those people who really do want to know how they can make a difference and what they can do to get there, this tool provides that type of information in a way that's really user-friendly, really easy. And, you know, I think a lot of people feel very helpless about the way the world is right now. This is something that can be very empowering to those that don't really know how to make a change with regard to their own personal carbon footprint.
This is great. I was going to ask you if it's also in Spanish and other languages, but if it's an app, I guess it depends how they set it up, if it's multilingual or not. That would just be a question I'd like to put out there. If you have the answer, great. If not, I'm sure there's a feedback mechanism. Go ahead, share.
The answer to that is there is none now, but it has been brought up several times. And the carbon tracker folks, which it is Croton 100. They're the ones that are leading this consortium. And they, once they have more funding to do it, they're looking for grants right now. They can extend this to in Spanish. And it wasn't the first time it was asked. It was asked by, I think, a couple of people.
Great. Thank you, Suzie. And this is great. I'm in total support of it, as you would imagine, but thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Suzie, thank you. Very interesting stuff, your Jaime and your presentation. But it's very interesting. I'm actually looking forward to finding out my footprint or our footprint when this does get up and running. And I would just like to say I'm in total support of it, and I'm in total support of putting a resolution together to show our support from the village for your program here.
Thank you.
Hey, Suzie, thank you. It's always you know, interesting environmental issues that you bring up to our board and to our attention, you know, as a community. It's very important that yes, I agree with everyone's comments. I actually had just 2 comments, I guess. Who creates our logo? Because I like the 100, the one in Croton, that's pretty cool. The one in your town is just, I don't know, not too crazy about it. I like the Croton one better. So I'll be interested who gets the 2 cents on you know, how our logo will look like for that one. The other one, I guess, is I don't know, more like a technical question, because I was going into the website and trying to log in. Now, I don't know if it's created that way, but you have to have, in a way, it's easier, let me say this, it's easier for you to log in into the app if you have a Gmail account. If you don't have a Gmail account, you have to follow a different sort of steps to get to that same level. Is that something that you think is going to change, or, you know, going forward, or do you think that could be, no, is it something that you can download in your iPhone? Is it something that you can just, or it's just strictly for on the website right now?
So that's a great question also. And again, another question that has been asked. It's not, they've only really been out for a couple of months.
Got it.
And both the question that you and Rika had are questions that have come up before because everybody doesn't have a Gmail account. But that is not, it's not something I think that they're focusing now on, but it is something that they plan to do a workaround.
Yeah. Okay.
And as far as the logo, I agree. I haven't asked that question. I was really focused on a few other things, but it is a very good question.
I'm in full support of this, definitely.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
So it sounds like you have unanimous support. It costs us nothing other than a little bit of staff time to write a resolution and 1 minute of our time next week to unanimously support the resolution that we think it's a great idea. So maybe it would be helpful if you could email us some of the key points to include in a resolution, and we'll ask our staff to put it in the proper format. And Stuart and Jamie and the clerk's office will make sure it's all ready for us next week.
Thank you so very much.
Yes, Stuart. Stuart had a question or a comment about it.
May I just be clear on something? It's not to create a chapter, it's just to support what they're doing, because the master plan for Cure 100 makes it clear that it is separate from municipalities. So I don't want us to be considered part of Cure 100.
Right. You're supporting our efforts to
Okay.
become a chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the municipality. So it would basically, it all falls under, in other words, we have to staff people to support things. And it's all volunteers. It's no different than Green Ossining. It's just that we're using their product to be able to inform our community. And so it doesn't really have anything to do with the municipality other than we're using the zip code and you.
So we're just writing a feel-good statement that we are really excited that Green Ossining is participating in this, and we're pleased that Ossining residents are going to be able to access this valuable carbon tracker, so that they can be empowered to make great decisions for the environment. Okay, so
Send
it's
it
not
to
a
me, I'll
Google
be happy to
document,
look.
really.
Sure.
Pardon?
Send it to me and I'll look at it. Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Suzie. Thanks very much.
And do you still want me to send you some?
Yeah, if you could just send us some talking points about what we're so excited to support.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you guys can actually, you can use the app right now. It doesn't matter that you're not in Austin. I mean,
Good. Then why don't you send us all the link to the app, and we'll
Yeah,
see how
I
many
will
of
do
us
that.
can get our information in there by next week, and we'll be able to start advertising it for people to start getting empowered to be able to make big changes.
Great.
I'm very excited to do mine. I think that the energy one for my household is the one that would be the most dramatic impact if Energy Smart Homes could work with my old house. I'm number 2 in efficiency, and I don't know if I have the option to move further down the scale, but I'd be really interested in that. So thanks.
Thanks you guys for the time again, as always.
Bye, Suzie. All right, Karen, what's next?
Up next will be the comprehensive plan zoning briefing, which will be led by Jaime Martinez of PowerPoint fame and Simon Keats from BFJ.
Hello, everybody. Mayor trustees, it's very nice to.
And I'm sorry, Frank Fish is here too from BFJ. And wait, we have a few other BFJ people here. So Jonathan Morton.
We also have Mark Evans as well. I think the manager gave a good introduction to BFJ. Everybody here, I think, is very familiar with BFJ. So I don't want to spend too much time getting into this. Simon, do you have the ability to show the presentation?
Jonathan is going to do it. Jonathan, do you want to make sure you're able to?
I have it queued up as a PDF, but not as a presentation. So if you have any difficulties.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, great job.
Okay, then I think we're okay to go on my end. Yep. Let me see.
All right, and I'm just going to provide a brief introduction to this, and it's going to be given mostly by Jonathan Martin, and then Mark Evans. Mark has worked with BFJ in a number of projects in North Hempstead and Long Island on form-based codes, and New Rochelle, and then Mount Kisco most recently. So I'm just going to give 2 slides to introduce this and then go over to Jonathan, and then Mark will finish up. I think most of you have seen this schedule, but I just wanted to highlight here that our master plan steering committee now has all the chapters, and we've got a meeting with them scheduled for November 17th. Once they've gone through everything, they've had their public hearing, and they'll be able, or if they stay on track, we'll be able to send to you in December the comprehensive plan in draft form from the committee. And so that dovetails with what we're talking about tonight. You've got 3 products, which we'll go over in a moment, from us on zoning. And it's those products in the plan that eventually, if you're, after you make revisions, comments, and so on, that we could have a public hearing on. So the zoning issues, when we began this, when we talked to Stuart originally, we broke them into 2 sort of groupings, and I just wanted to highlight those quickly. One is sort of housekeeping, code maintenance issues, and the building department brought up a number of these. So Stuart and the building department are going to head up that sort of list of things you see here. And then we focused on the issues related to the comprehensive plan and the waterfront downtown, the T district. So those types of things we're going to talk about. So with that, you can go to the next slide, Jonathan. And then I'm going to turn this over to Jonathan to talk about, and Mark, to talk about the 3 products that we have sent you on the T district. This idea that came out of discussions with Jaime on the MF3, and then the overlay districts.
Yep. Thank you, Frank. Good evening, everybody. As Frank said, these are sort of the 3 main areas of zoning work that we've done. And what we're going to do is sort of walk through each of these in succession tonight and talk a little bit more about the details that we've developed and are proposing. And I want to suggest that maybe after we get through the T district and the MF3, before we go to the overlay and hear the details on the form-based overlay, maybe we should stop for a second and just check in and see if there are any questions, and then we can proceed from there. As many of you know from the memos that we've sent out, and maybe also from some of our previous presentations, when we were asked to look specifically at the T district, some of the analyses that had been done prior and some of these, the data that was given to us that we did further analysis on, suggests that there's a whole range of non-conforming issues. And, non-conforming means that the zoning says one thing in a variety of dimensions, but for some reason or another, a parcel does not conform to the zoning. And across the T district, about 70% of the parcels have some dimension of nonconformity. So that was something that we were asked to look at. We also know this as a, it's called a 2-family district, but 2-family units are not allowed as a principal permitted use. We also know from spending time in Ossining and also going on a walking tour of a few areas with Karen and Jaime, and just observing around the T district the issues of overcrowding, parking on street. And then we've also had discussions about illegal subdivisions and some of those challenges, and thinking about a pathway to legalize some of these. And so from here, I'll just jump into sort of 4 main ideas or proposals that we have for the T district. The first one is fairly simple in concept. in that it's, you know, entitled a two-family residential district and does not allow those units. And so our first proposal is to simply allow two-family residences as a principal permitted use in the T district. A couple you know, reasons for this is that not only its name, but also the idea that any units that are currently two-family that didn't proceed that way through maybe the appropriate conditional use process or whatever would find a way to alleviate that nonconformity as a step one. A second recommendation is to allow three-family residential units in the T district. Again, we know there are numerous examples of this in the district. And again, it's an issue of nonconformity. And so the idea of allowing three-family residential units as by special permit, which means that the planning board would get to review this very carefully and make a discretionary decision on whether a project might go forward or not. I would imagine parking would be a big issue, and we have something to talk about to address parking in a couple slides. But you know, this allows three-family units, but it allows it by special permit. So there's a strong level of oversight. Again, it provides this pathway for those existing three-family that are not supposed to, you know, by the zoning, should not be in the T district. It gives them a pathway to legalize. And I think that's something that's, you know, sort of very important as you want to see, you know, providing the opportunity for improvement of a particular house and or residential unit. So they don't have to sort of do things behind the scenes. We want to sort of bring this out and allow them to improve those conditions and make them legal for a variety of reasons, including, you know, fire, health, and safety. Our third proposal for the T district is, you know, specifically aimed at, again, alleviating some of this nonconformity. A lot of the nonconformity in the T district has to do with lot size, and the you know, the really comes down to the situation where if you were to say, well, what is the dimension that's really off here that's making this, say, undersized parcel or this particular parcel non-conforming, you could probably boil it down and deal with a lot of things if you look carefully at the minimum side yard requirements, which are you know, presently 12 for one side yard or 28 for both. Now, I did a cursory look at many, you know, many of the parcels. It's not scientific, but I did a good hard look at many of the parcels in the T district, and there is a lot that are down, you know, in the 37 to 42, 47, 45 foot width. The required lot width is 75. And so, you know, if you had a required, a conforming 75-foot lot, you know, maybe the, you know, the existing 12 and 28, you know, would work appropriately. The fact is that a lot of the nonconformity comes from narrower lots. And so this creates a situation where it's a non-conforming. So to do any sort of renovation, even sort of small improvements, requires, hey, you want them to get a proper permit to do this. In order to do that, they have to then go through the Zoning Board of Appeals, which again is a costly and confusing step. And you know, I would imagine that, you know, many people might just sort of skip that and continue this sort of you know, pattern of you know, not being, you know, sort of open and going through and actually benefiting from the guidance that the building department could offer them in this case. So our proposal here is to reduce the minimum side yard dimensions in the T-zone from, for one side yard, from 12 foot down to 8 foot, and collectively for both side yards from 28 foot to 20 feet, again, in this effort to alleviate some of this nonconformity. Our last proposal is to address some of the overcrowding that occurs on the street in much of the area of the T district. If you look through the T district, again, because your lots are, some of the lots, quite a few of the lots are narrower, there's actually, not that hard to find residential parcels that have really, very narrow lots and no off-street parking. People need cars and therefore they park on the street. So the idea here is, if you look at the two graphics, the one on the left and the one in the middle here or to the right, is to allow some limited off-street parking in the front yard. The front yard is this, defined dimension, and it falls between sort of the side yard, the two side yards. And in the existing zoning, you can see it on the left-hand side. You've got to have a 28-foot, as I mentioned, the side yards combined. If you were to rebuild, for example, under that, you would, have a very, very narrow house. It would be occupy quite a bit of the width of the lot, especially if the lot was a pre-existing and undersized. So the idea here is to allow some parking within 14 feet of the side lot line in the front yard of the T district, with the provision that some edge, a 2-foot minimum setback edge from the property line would be maintained, and that regardless of where the front entrance is to the house, you can see on this very simplified diagram, if you can see my cursor here, this is supposed to be the entrance. We know the entrance isn't always right in the center of the house. Sometimes it's offset. But one of the provisions here, and in a way it's a little bit of a thought about design. If you were to place any parking in the front yard within 14 feet, as we're suggesting, that would be represented by these two pink areas. By no means would it would be prohibited. By no means should it be allowed to be in front of the front entranceway. The main entrance to the house. And on the third column to the right side, we make a suggestion that we bring the minimum parking standards to what we believe it would be more suitable, and based on our experience in this ratio would work quite well, and bring it down from requiring every unit to have 2 spaces to sort of calibrating that by a little bit more scale to the size of the unit, if you will. So you begin with 1.25 spaces, right? And then you add a quarter space off-street parking requirement per additional bedroom. This is actually, if you take a look at the code, this is, very close to what is currently specified for some districts already in the Ossining code. So the next couple slides here talk about a new proposal, a proposal for a multifamily 3 district. And this would allow for placement of smaller multifamily or townhouse, row house infill development in, particular areas, to be deemed appropriate in the future. I'm going to jump around a little bit and go down to the bottom bullet point. And just state right up front that we haven't picked areas for that this should be mapped. We don't think we should at this point. It should be mapped where the Board of Trustees feels it would be appropriate after the adoption of the comprehensive plan, and when that would come, it would require its own seeker process. It would have to be looked at carefully, of course. But the idea here is to expand housing choice and encourage reinvestment in key areas, accommodate parking on site, So, you know, we as you'll see, I'll give you the parameters of the zoning in just a second. We've looked very carefully at some of the types of sites this might work on and, you know, develop a proposal, I think, that will accommodate, it will accommodate parking, off-street parking on site. We also propose within this district an option for accessory apartment, an accessory residential use, an apartment in a townhouse. Again, we would recommend that that be handled as a special permit, not you know, sort of as of right or by default. But again, this is tied into this idea of some things that we have heard through the planning process that relate to, you know, a variety of housing types and offering housing choices and providing affordability. Another dimension to this that I think of sometimes is, you know, if somebody was to buy and you know, buy in a townhouse, having a small accessory apartment to rent out can certainly help with that, you know, covering the mortgage and, you know, fulfilling housing for locals, which you know, I think is something else that we've heard through this process. So the next slide actually presents the parameters or the proposed parameters for this type of district. Again, you know, if we take a look at your two existing multifamily districts, you know, one, you know, MF1, you would say is, you know, a fairly large lot, a 1 acre lot minimum, right? With a sort of a lower scale, 2.5 stories. MF2 is also quite a large lot. You know, put together an acre of a lot. You can go up to, you can see here, 6 stories or 70 feet. And you'll see that, you know, they both hold here, you know, the minimum livable areas per dwelling unit, which seem to make sense. The difference here between these two is not just the height, but also, you know, the overall minimum lot area per dwelling. And so you go from 36, we'll just look at the 1 bedroom here for a second, guys. It's 3,600 per 1 bedroom. You go to the MF2, it's the same lot size, it's down to 1,000. So, you know, if you were to divide that, you would get very different densities. One sort of around probably at 12 or a 13. This one's probably around, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of a 42, 43 dwelling units per acre. What we tried to do with the MF3 here is, you know, capture that, you know, what we would call missing middle, and tailor it to allow for smaller infill development where appropriate, as I said, to expand housing choice. So the minimum lot area matches the T district, 7,500, as well as the minimum lot width. Where you look at the minimum front yard, we do adjust that. For this, we were looking carefully at a few areas. One is along Aqueduct, one is on Yale Avenue, and understanding sort of that context there. And other places this might be mapped, you know, thinking about a smaller setback, so responding to the existing context, but making sure that we maintain a minimum 10-foot back for setback from the curb. The sidewalks are very narrow in some of these areas and in some of the older parts of the village. So the idea here would be to provide a little bit more breathing space. Now, you know, when you look at this, and I looked at many of these lots here, the idea here would be, if possible, if there's enough depth, to have the parking to the rear. That may not always be the case. Some of these lots are, you know, not very deep. And so some parking could be tucked under. Again, one of the ideas here is to expand housing choice, but then also accommodate off-street parking. But if parking was to be tucked under in the rear, no problem. If it's going to be tucked under in the front, then we suggest that we increase that minimum front yard set or the setback there to 20 feet, so that the car is and the garage tucks under in a garage would be quite far back. And even if the car didn't pull into, say, the garage, it would not be blocking or extending out into the public right away on the sidewalk. The side yard setbacks are those that we felt would work for a lot of this size, but also ensure that this 12-foot minimum for one would accommodate a driveway to the rear of the building. That's what that is about. We maintained the minimum livable floor area per dwelling unit. This is where I'm at right here. And then in terms of this minimum lot area per dwelling unit, I mean, this is kind of where the density comes from, right? We had two very different densities here. This is kind of right in the middle at about 20 or 21 dwelling units to the acre. So sort of that sweet spot, I think, in the middle. And that begins with 2,500 square feet of lot area, per dwelling unit for lots less than 12,000 square feet. The 12,000 square feet is, one of those figures that sort of allows for this range. You have a minimum lot area 7,500 square feet, but 12,000 would accommodate many of the lots. If, however, a developer would put two lots together, and that would reach over 12,000 or greater, then we suggest reducing the minimum lot area to slightly increase the density. So this would come down to 2,000 square feet. In a way, this is about a 20% density bonus if you did the math, and that's to encourage some agglomeration and produce a bit more housing here where possible, and a variety of housing types. The max building height is at 3 feet. 3 stories and 38 feet to allow for this parking to be potentially tucked under, and then we've increased the coverages because we are dealing with smaller lots. We're not up at an acre lot anymore. We're down at 7,500. So to make something like this potentially work and be successful, and offer these kinds of either townhouses or small infill multifamily types of units, I think the more affordable housing types, we'd need a little bit more coverage. The last slide on this before I stop and we can go to questions is looking at the parking ratios, or the proposed parking ratios. You can see that this is, again, the recommendation that we made a few slides ago for the T district. We're using the same one. We're proposing the same one for this new MF3 district, and you'll see that it's quite close, to your existing MF2s. It just does this, increases the number of off-street parking space requirements by the number of bedrooms, not roughly, just by the unit size as it does, or by the unit per unit, I guess, in the T district. So I think that was quite a mouthful. I hope you were able to stay with me, but I'd like to open it up for questions, and we can kind of go from there. If you prefer, we can wait till the end after Mark has given his presentation.
There's a lot here. There's a lot here, Jonathan. That was a good thought that we pause here.
Okay.
And I'm torn between wanting to see everybody, and there's just so much information on the screen that I think we'll probably want to be flipping back and forth to. I have a list of questions, but I have a feeling that my colleagues will probably ask some of them. So I'll listen to what my colleagues have to say, and maybe they'll all get asked. So I'm gonna open it up. I can't see. Oh, we can see everybody. Okay, but we might need to go back into
we definitely can go back, but this is a nicer way to begin, I think, right?
It is. Thank you. All right. So there's just there's a lot there. I particularly have a lot of questions about the MF3 zone.
Mhm.
And to your credit, you answered some of my questions while I was writing them down, so that was good. Yeah, it was good that we didn't interrupt you and start asking questions. Let me mute myself and hear what my colleagues have to say. Looks like Rika's already off mute. She's ready to go. Go ahead, Rika.
Yeah, I need to sort of unpack this, and I'm not going to be able to do it in a work session. And I would appreciate that would not be taken as my agreement to everything that's being said. I sort of want to understand what the entire goal of all this is. What were your instructions when you were designing all of this?
For which one? For
For all of it.
Well, really for the T district, this was based on conversations and observations, looking at the current zoning, looking at existing conditions, many meetings that talked where, there were common, issues that kept rising up to the top. And so these became some of the issues that we began to look at. As I began this, one of the primary issues certainly is the nonconformity. And as I said, I mean, if I just think about being a property owner for a minute, and I bought this piece of property, I'm living there, maybe I don't have that much money, but I want to do some fix up, and then I go to find out that, oh, this is non-conforming, and that means I've got to go and ask for everything I want to do. I've got to go to the and get a variance or get permission to do that in every instance. One of the things we would like to do is, release some of that a little bit. I think that was, if you're asking what was one of the big ideas, I think we were thinking about people and owners and their plight when they they have to go about these things. So reducing the nonconformity was a main driver, Rika.
Okay. Not quite answering my question, however. So you went and looked at the properties, and you were looking at it from the point of view of a property owner and what he or she would have to go through. And the idea is that people built things that were not in code, or bought things that were not in code. So the solution is to legalize it all. But you're looking at an individual. What about the neighborhood and the community? What about the neighbor who has to live with cars now parked in the front when they don't do that? So for me, the interest is not about, I think it's an interesting point of view. I have to tell you, think like putting yourself in the shoes of someone is really interesting. The question I continuously sort of struggle with is that every one of these presentations, not just from you, that I sit through with this comp plan, is about construction and building. What continues to sort of make me scratch my head and sort of keep me up at night is that there are no conversations about people and neighborhoods, that it's designed for, we'll put this 2 feet over and that 2 feet over, because the fact that people now park and there are too many cars, the solution will be to simply make the front yards now new parking opportunities. And that would be good for the person living in that house. It doesn't talk about all the other people living in the neighborhood who, A, did go through the trouble of doing things the right way, or B, actually would argue that for the look of the entire neighborhood, when I took the walk, it was about how you look at the effect that decisions make on an entire area in a positive way, not simply, this is the way it is, therefore let's just legalize it. That's sort of, I will say to you that one of the takeaways was that commentary. My second takeaway is that I just don't get where people come into it. In other words, it seems to me that these conversations have, first of all, it's very hard for me to tell what conversations you're all having, because every time I see this presentation, and I've said this a number of times already, there is no continuity from one presentation about this comp plan to the next when presenting to the BOT. There's not a list of all the questions that came up from the last time, the input that was given, and how that fed into the next step. It's like, I feel like I should be in planning or zoning and this should be presented, because frankly, I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at. These solutions are solutions of concrete. They're not people-oriented solutions. So for me, I now have to spend my time looking through your presentation to really sort of think about where you walked and what you did. So it makes me unhappy that a presentation once again is presented without, for me, the continuity. And hey, we heard this is what was said to us. I don't know who's saying anything. I don't know if it's simply the planning department that you're meeting with, or if you're meeting with 150 people, because there doesn't seem to be a feedback loop to any of this. So that's number one. That's actually number 1, 2, and 3. That is annoying, actually, when you're watching a presentation. So I sort of have wanted that to get better, and that still doesn't work for me. I like your idea of the concept of housing choice. That's an interesting sort of lexicon that I'm sort of thinking about. I read a number of consulting reports. We haven't happened to in Westchester, take out cities, probably have the most choice, because we have so many co-ops and so many condos and so many, I don't think we have townhouses as much, but we have a lot of condos.
Right.
So if I were to give you 2 headlines for what Ossining needs, it's interesting because I would never have thought of choice as one of those. That would be something in other communities. So I'm struggling with where the information is coming from and why more, smaller lots, higher up in the sky. When I grew up, that's what they said to do in Queens. That's one of the reasons my family ran out of Queens, is that front lawns were turned into these little concrete parking spaces. Then they became, you know, why not pour concrete over the whole thing and forget the grass? And then it just became like, and I've said this, by the way, to the village manager, we both come from Long Island. It's like, I'm not sure what it is that you were told to solve for. So trying, and it certainly speaks to, I'm not sure where your input is coming from. And if it's only the, so that's sort of my commentary. And that was my question about those townhouses, row houses. What person suggested row houses? I don't remember one conversation about row houses as an option. There are communities moving away from those because of the blight they end up creating in some of the cities in this country. So I feel there's a disconnect, and I've lived in this community a long time. So that is sort of, these are solutions that I'm not sure what you're solving for, and I'm not sure where the input is, and it makes me really nervous that we're heading down a path like this. And I don't actually understand the parking solution at all. Parking and making front lawns smaller is a solution. You know, I don't even know where that's coming from. So that's something I'm going to have to look at. And it's nothing really for you to answer. It's really for the consultants we hire, who I'm still struggling with having these presentations. Follow A to B to C through D, rather than what I feel is a zoning analysis, which I don't know what to do with. To be honest, I'm not an expert in zoning, so I don't know what I'm listening to be honest.
I'm sorry about that. I mean, one of the things that, if you haven't seen it, we did put out a memo on this that talked about each of these in quite a bit more detail. And if you don't have that, I would like to get you a copy of that.
Was I supposed to get it?
Yeah, all the trustees got this proposal, Rika.
When?
It was sent to you, I think, several weeks ago before this. In other words, the proposal on T-zone and the proposal for the MF3. I also might be able to add for you your first question. Where we began this, in fact, our very first meetings in the village after, meeting with the manager was to meet with staff, particularly the building inspector, the building department, and then the chair of the ZBA and the chair of the planning board. And then of course, Jaime was hired and we met extensively with him, and we met with Stuart. So we tried to get a handle on what were the existing problems that were identified to us from the land use staff.
Okay, can I we keep doing this. Okay, I get all that. That's village staff is giving you all the input. That's not the public. That's village staff. It's a zoning conversation. That's not my understanding of what this comprehensive plan. It never seems to get beyond zoning. So I now recall the information that was sent to us, and it was in depth. It still doesn't answer for me about any public commentary about any of the stuff or any of the input that we're supposed to have. So I never know what I'm supposed to do with this meeting, except that I get presented with zoning stuff and nothing about, like, you know what? I think that it's just that some of this presentation for me is not really where my feedback is. And so I guess that for me, it feels like I don't get heard. So I'm gonna sort of take myself off this conversation and just wait till my other colleagues listen. Because from my point of view, I don't think I'm being heard about what I think should be done when it comes to zoning. So I think I'll just take this offline because I know that this is probably not the appropriate time and place to have this conversation.
So I'm going to chime in for a moment, and then I think Manny probably has some questions because I know Manny and I have talked about some of the proposed zoning changes, and land use is something that I very much enjoy and have really spent a lot of time trying to learn about in the last 8 years in public office. So just a couple of things that you mentioned that the change in the parking recommendation of being 1.25 for I guess a studio, and then a quarter of a car for each additional bedroom.
Yeah.
That, yeah, I mean, it sounds like that in a lot of situations that will end up being, you know, that didn't seem unreasonable to me. And I appreciate your effort to try and address the parking problem, because if there's one thing we get a lot of complaints about, it's on-street parking in neighborhoods that might now have multifamilies that were built when cars were just not nearly the consideration that they are now, and there's no driveway or there's very limited driveways. I just when we talk about, one of the things that I did want to mention from what I see in T zones, and I want to understand the 2-family as a permitted use, and then the potential for a 3-family as a conditional use. The 2-family as a permitted use, for example, I know there was a house that came, it's in a T zone, I think it was on North Malcolm or something, and they were a 1-family house and they wanted to be a 2-family house. And they're in the T zone, so that didn't seem unreasonable. But it ended up being quite challenging to be able to accomplish. And one of the things I became aware of through that process is we currently, I think, don't allow for side-by-side 2-family homes. Is that still the case? And is there a strong recommendation for that one way or the other?
Yeah, you don't currently allow that, and Joe is on. If he nods, I'll go with him. But my understanding is that there is in the code the stipulation that you can have one 2-family house one on top of another, but this vertical party wall, if you will, is clearly defined otherwise in the code. Yeah.
And is there any good reason for us to maintain that?
Well,
It seems silly to me.
Yeah, where we've tried to introduce the townhome concept is in the MF3, where we thought we might be able to give an incentive for people to develop slightly larger lots. As Jonathan mentioned, a lot larger than 12,000 square feet. So you could get maybe 4 to 6 townhomes if a person had a large enough lot. We did this fairly successfully in Mount Kisco, and one of the most popular housing types now in Westchester are these townhomes. Pleasant, where we just did their master plan, Toll Brothers has done a set of townhomes there. They still keep to the height. We're not going above existing height levels. We're trying to control those, and we're not creating any smaller lots. So the lot of 7,500 which is the minimum in the T-zone, remains the same in the MF3. So we're not reducing lot size and we're not increasing heights, but we are allowing another form of housing, which is relatively, Rika spoke of Queens or that type of thing, which was maybe called a row house at that time. But these new townhouses have been very well received in most of the communities we've been working with in Westchester. So and we've set minimums like a 25-foot minimum width to those townhomes if they came in. And by the way, many of the older ones you'll see are 18 feet wide or 20 feet wide. We've set minimums that are contemporary in terms of creating a very livable unit. So that's what we've tried to do with the townhomes. We have allowed them in the MF3, and we've tried to be careful on the MF3 and that's why we thought it is a newer concept, and that it not be mapped now, that we have plenty of time, that the trustees have plenty of time to discuss this. And also then, after the plan was adopted, you could consider whether or not you want to do something like this. I mean, if you prefer not to, it would be your choice. You wouldn't have to adopt it as text. If you adopted it as text, you then still have a decision. It doesn't get mapped anywhere until you have either an application for it or let's say the planning department makes a referral to you, or the planning board. So this would be totally up to you on the MF3. So that's what we're trying to do.
So before we get to the MF3, because you just made me think of like 3 more questions, and I know that others want to ask questions, and I said I was going to wait, but now I can't wait. Sorry, Manny. I said Manny, I'll go next, and then I just started asking my questions. Just for a second, let me just understand, when it comes to the T-zone, we have 4 existing neighborhoods that are T-zones, or they're T districts. And the way that the simplest question I just want to answer first, because then MF3 brings up a lot of other questions. 2-family homes, as we currently have in our zoning allowance for 2-family homes that are stacked on top of each other, and upstairs and downstairs.
Right.
I don't see a compelling reason why we shouldn't allow for a 2-family home where it's side by side. And I'm not talking about an MF3, because that's like a whole nother set of a whole nother category. But in our existing T district, is there a reason why the planning world would think it's a bad idea to allow for side by side 2-family homes? Because some of them exist in our community. It's not like they would be totally foreign to Ossining. So I don't understand why we wouldn't, if we're updating the T district, why we wouldn't make that update to allow for more flexibility, because some properties just lend themselves better to being reconfigured in one way or another.
Yeah, well, certainly a two-family home, as Jonathan said, done vertically, so you've got a firewall between the two. That could be done in the T-zone.
Right. It's just not something that's had come up before. So I just wanted to know that there's not like a compelling reason why we should never allow for that. We could make that update now, and it probably wouldn't come up that often, but it's there and we allow that flexibility. There's not a compelling reason not to allow that flexibility.
Yeah, and we have just suggested that a minimum width to that townhome be 25 feet.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about townhomes. I'm thinking about like just a 2-family home,
Yeah, it would be a 2-family. So you
could be
just
front porch, whatever, like, I don't know. I don't know. I guess, okay, so we're really going to talk about the MF3. So I'll just ask my questions about the MF3. So you mentioned that the MF3 was part of the new zoning in Mount Kisco. Are there any neighborhoods in Mount Kisco that we could look at to see what it looks like in Mount Kisco?
Yes, there's a couple at the top of my head. I'd have to get back to you. I'll talk to you.
Yeah, no, if you could, it's not urgent, but I'd love to just check it out so I could try and envision it. And I know what you're suggesting then is that we create the zone language and the structure that could then be applied to be put into place in a location where it might be deemed appropriate at some point. Is that right? Is it like a floating zone are we talking about?
Yeah, in essence, all we are suggesting on the MF3, because it is new, it's the only new thing, of this nature, a new type of zone that we're suggesting, is that just put it in text. And you're right, it would be essentially like a floating zone, but it would just be text that applies to something that has not been mapped. And then the mapping would be up to you in the future if you get a recommendation from, for instance, Jaime or the planning department. There are a couple of streets we have looked at. What we didn't want to do was make, Jonathan mentioned.
You mentioned Yale and someplace
Yale
else.
and
Right?
Aqueduct. Yeah, Yale and Aqueduct.
Okay.
We don't want to
Okay.
propose those because we don't want to get into new zones like that in the comprehensive plan because no one has mentioned anything specifically to us, except the problem of this sort of what we, in our planning realm, is called the missing middle, nothing between a family house and then a 6-story multifamily. We wanted to provide that missing middle option to the trustees. And then once the plan was adopted, you have that mentioned in the plan, you have text, you may want to modify the text. So it doesn't rush you in any way, gives you plenty of time to analyze and plenty of time to respond. And I appreciate what Rinka said. For instance, she has a lot of questions. So I think we didn't want to rush anything. And we thought, having something in text, just as another tool for you, would leave you a tool you may or may not want to revise or use in the future.
Yeah, I want to just maybe add a little bit that I think that two of the biggest things that people have talked about, whether it's talking to trustees or really anybody involved, Ossining, it's the sort of love of the character and scale of the community and the neighborhood. The MF3 zone is essentially identical in height. It's fairly similar in scale. It's just a little bit more dense than the T zone, and it's obviously significantly less dense than the MF3 zones. And so that was the idea behind the sort of the text behind it, being able to create some infill opportunities where the current zoning doesn't necessarily work. And in conversations with, in particular with like Pat Yost on the Comprehensive Steering Committee, the discussion was, well, the T zone is an interesting area in certain sections that this might work, the MF3 zone, but there also potentially are some areas in certain S75 zones where it might work. But again, as Frank mentioned, it's something that really needs to be thought about very heavily and weighed very considerably before, moving that discussion too far forward. And so this is just a text, and it provides like another tool in the tool chest for the Board of Trustees.
I thank you for that, and thank you for helping me understand your philosophy and proposing it the way that you are. I think that politically, it's tough for us to get behind something when we know there's a lot of pushback to density. If we can't really visualize where it would be, which is why I know you're not saying you're proposing it for Aqueduct or for Yale, but it helps us to understand, to envision when it might make sense, because those are very different than some of the other streets that are in a T zone. So it may be that I wouldn't. I'm not sure of the path forward for it to be successful, but I think it's going to have to be a little more clearly defined before it's going to get approved in such a with so much lack of clarity on how it might be applied. That's my concern right now, even though I actually think it's very interesting. And I just two more things, and then we could talk about this all night. At least I could. I find it fascinating. But I did want to say about the parking in the front of the properties. I'm not as concerned because a lot of houses have parking in front of their homes in a lot of different types of neighborhoods. That in itself, if it's done the way that what the problem is, if somebody just starts parking vehicles all across the entire front of the house, whereas you've made very clear distinctions and parameters. Although any new construction in these zones would have a minimum of 12 feet on one side, so theoretically they would be able to have parking in the back, right? Because 12 feet.
That's right. You can have a driveway.
Depending on the depth of the lot, though, there are certain areas where the depth of the lot makes that challenging.
Right, right. And we have so many existing lots that are going to work around this, and it's probably a lot of the older existing lots that are going to look to have potential off-street, parking in the front. And we do have such a challenge with off-street parking that I think there's probably a way to do that would not detract from the pleasant character of the neighborhood. I do think that that's definitely a good suggestion to explore. Then my last question has to do with the minimum floor area for the living space. So it came up, there was a building, it was built in Ossining, and they did not comply with our minimum square footage in the units, and it became a really big deal, and review it, and we don't have to rehash that, and we've certainly learned from that, and our process would probably never allow for that to happen again. Manny remembers, he's laughing. What I took away from it was, at the same time that we've got this going on, I'm going to all of these planning conferences and hearing about micro units and how having these really small unit homes, and I know there's nothing is perfect, and people can complain about any potential proposed scenario, but one of the ways to get to that missing middle, that was my understanding, was to have these micro units, which are inherently more affordable because you're paying for less square footage, so more units can fit in a home. And a very small home is not going to have a lot of children, most likely, and it's probably also not going to have a lot of cars. So I feel like if we're going to prescribe minimum square footage that's consistent with what we already had, I mean, I was in those units that were found to be undersized.
So,
It's a nice place to live, and they still are there. I'm not so sure that this minimum square footage should be our gold standard going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, it's a good comment. We just had not, to use Rika's term, we had not heard it from a lot of sources and a lot of people in the public. So we were a little reticent to get into that. But if you think it's something, Mayor, we should explore, that is something we could adjust minimum lot sizes, within the same allowable square footage. Therefore, you could get slightly more units. And again, that would be a slight density issue. But no, a lot of communities are doing that. You're absolutely right. I would just set some minimum, maybe the federal government minimum, so we don't get, you don't get back to the old boarding house. So you make sure you have a habitable, minimum space. But a lot of communities are looking at micro units.
Okay. Well, then I have now exhausted my list for the moment. And so, Manny, I said you could ask your questions like 15 minutes ago, and then I jumped in. So now I'm really going to mute myself.
Thank you, Mayor. And actually, that I don't mind talking about planning. I think it's 9:24, and we still have 2 more items I'm thinking in the agenda. So I'm going to
you have Mark Evans on the overlay districts.
Correct. So and it's interesting because I don't think he's in today watching this, but I did have a conversation with Pat early today myself, just kind of going over the memo that was sent out, and we were talking about the MF3 zones and what that looks like. So the memo that you guys sent, that Simon sent, was on March 29, I believe, and that was sent out to all of us. And it was a little bit of the description of the presentation that you guys just did today in regards to the, to the MF3 zone. Some of the parking was there. So, I'm going to kind of piggyback in a little bit of the stuff that Rika said. And Jonathan, you and I kind of were talking about this offline before the meeting started, sure.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff. So I think for us is essential to look into this in a different way, I guess. Because as Jonathan and I were talking about it early today, if you drive by some of the neighborhoods where the T-zone locations are, each neighborhood is unique. Each neighborhood is different. Some of them, you'll be able to, some of them you do see people parking in front of their properties, that they have gone either through the zoning board and asked for variance, they have obtained a variance, or the ones that may have not do that and they're just doing something that they should not be doing. But there's neighborhoods that, to me, so I guess as an overall question is, what we are trying to gain by putting a parking in front of the property. You know, so there comes a tricky question. Sure, if we're trying to do this just on the T zones, or we're trying to change make the changes throughout our code itself, because there's difference. Sure, if and Bob can help me out with this one, Bob Fricci, when he was a member on the zoning board, the majority of my recollection, and I could be wrong, and probably Stuart can help me, or Joe can help me, Joe Agostinelli can help me on this one too, but the majority of the people that used to go and ask for variance are residents that were in a single family zone, either an X50 or an S75. You know, it wasn't that many people from a T zone perspective that is my recollection, at least, from the meetings that I have watched and the agendas that I have seen in there. So that's sort of one. The other one is, as soon as you open this door, you putting a vehicle park in front of your property. So for you to able to do that, you have to do a curb cut on your sidewalk. So that means you really, you're gaining a spot in front of your house, but in reality, you losing a spot as well on the street. So it's sort of like an even game, sure. Now, if it's a two-family, are you proposing to have, depending on the width of the property, it be allowable to have two cars parking in front? That's just a question. You don't have to, those are just questions that while I was reading the memo and I was going in front of your presentation, I was going over my head. It's like, so what does that look like? Because now, if you have a driveway that comes in, if you have a curve that is on your sidewalk, to maneuver two cars, your curve cut has to be wider. So now you're really losing another parking spot in there. And now what that becomes is, because I done this in one of the things I've done is in your town, Cortland, that installing a driveway or just kind of proposing the relocation of a driveway. What the engineer and department, they ask you for a line of sight diagram. You have to do this line of sight. What does that look like? And if we are in the village of Ossining, if you need a spot, you park as close as you can to the curve of a driveway or someone's driveway. So now if I'm coming out of my driveway, my line of sight just got diminished because the cars are parked so close. So to me, it's like, so what is the advantage of us creating something? It could be an unsafe condition for someone trying to get out of their own driveway, or trying to come out of, backwards, because not most of the time you're going to come in and you're going to go in front, go forward into your property. So I think that's one of the things that I was talking to Jonathan earlier today. And it's like, sometimes you just need to walk the neighborhood to understand that. And I think that's something that I've spoken to Pat, and I said, I think we have to, as a steering committee, I think we have to do a field trip and just kind of talk about this and kind of see all this stuff. And that's a little bit of the point with, what Rico was talking about earlier today is like, where is this coming from? And that's a conversation that I feel that the steering committee needs to have as a whole, because they are, me as a village board member, we want to hear the recommendations on some of them, what they're doing. So that's sort of, in relationship to the T-zone, and kind of changing a little bit of what the parking regulations or the other one. But to one of the things that Frank, you presented earlier today, a T-zone, two-family, yes, as a right. They don't need to go into an additional ask for a permit in front of the Planning Architecture Review Board. Yes, we should change that text, and we should do that like yesterday. In regards to the MF3s, that is a little bit more complicated for me, and that's something that I expressed to Pat as well, and we were kind of talking about that with Jonathan as well. It's like, I think we have to I don't picture that, because let's say, and I always say this because, let's say, I'm not gonna call Indian Village, but let's say an X50 zone, that could be a potential to be an MF3 zone. Sure, it could have a land opportunity. What does that look like? Does it change the neighborhood? What is the neighbors going to think? If we do the same thing in a T-zone area where we know that they could possibly meet the criteria, what does that look like? I think we have to see what we are talking about. You know, sometimes, you know, when Jaime brought, at least to me, when we're talking about wetlands and he brought a map, it presented a different picture. The perspective was different than just looking at words and a piece of paper. Sure, now you have the whole picture. So to me, and one of the things that I have heard before in the past is like, you know, you're doing spot zoning. So if you leave that window open for a board, a future board, where an MF3 is more like a floating zone, that it could be anywhere within the village, to me it becomes very dangerous political, obviously. That's one. Two is, what is the use of that? Does it change the character of that neighborhood? Does it change the character of what they're trying to accomplish? Just because it's in the books, that doesn't mean it will work in that community, you know, or in that neighborhood itself. So I'm a little bit, you know, and so that's one of my biggest concern. The other biggest concern that I have is, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing it's a T-zone regulations. The only difference is pretty much you're increasing more. You know, you're increasing. We're not helping the T-zones that we may, or the T-zones or properties that are in the T-zones that they may need some help. You know, what does that look like to me? Let's say I have 7,500 square feet. I don't meet the requirements on the setbacks, but I have the lot. And I have a room to put the attic, let's say in this case, to make it a third floor apartment. Obviously, I have to comply with new code. I have to put sprinkle systems on, and I have to do all this stuff. But let's say I don't have the room to do parking. I don't have the parking spaces because I have a cliff in the back of my backyard that doesn't allow me to put 2 additional parking spaces. So now we're creating a zone where I have to go in front of the zoning board. And
Well, what we suggested here, Manny, and that, if I might just mention, we kind of discussed that in-house and said,
Yeah.
if we make that third unit, the third unit you just mentioned, say in the attic, allowable by special permit at the planning board, then you don't have to go to the ZBA. You're in front of one board, and though you have to show the planning board, if you don't have the parking, they don't have to grant that unit. But if you do have the land and you can meet the parking requirement, then you could get that third unit.
But that's something that I think I need more clarification in what that exactly means, because we have done a special permits to increase the volume and the capacity in a project, correct? So to me, it's like not clear. And the most dangerous part, again, to me, is more like spot zoning and what does that look like? So, you know, I have a lot of concerns about that. So I think we can definitely, we should definitely have, you know, for you guys to clarify what that looks like. To me, I'm not in favor of adding an MF3 zone. I'm in favor of doing something, because I know that there's a lot of unsafe conditions and unsafe housing in Ossining, but to me, it's not, you know, helping that. I don't see that helping. I'm seeing more like an increase, because one of the biggest things that we hear, obviously, as a board members is, you know, we have more housing. We don't need more housing. We have all this stuff, but you know, at the same time, we have the responsibility to create safe conditions, safe housing, and a lot of this. So I need to find that balance of what that looks like. So we can definitely have a no-fly conversation on this, and probably Rika may be able to be part of that. I think anybody on this could be part of that, just to have a better understanding of what that looks like. Something else that I wanted to, let me go back into that memo. There was something else, 2 more things, sorry. You know, what is interesting is other parts of the country, and I'm not saying that we should do this here in Ossining, but other parts of the country, a couple of years, about at least last year, at least when I was doing some work in California for my previous office, I I noticed that the building code, the IVC code, had a section about tiny houses. You know, we all watch those shows, the home improvement stuff channels, and then we see these tiny houses. There's like literally less than 400 square feet, is literally having a small shed in their house, and that's what, you know, people live. They like to do that. It was not until now with 2010, and Joe can, I believe, can clarify that and correct me if I'm wrong, but the 2020 New York, now that New York went back to the New York State Building Code, it actually does have a section about tiny houses and what does that look like. I'm not saying we should do a whole thing about tiny houses, but that's something that, you know, the state already realized that that's common. That's sort of like it became a trend everywhere else in the country. In regards to the apartments, I think, you know, New York State does have a provision in there where there's a minimum requirements. And I know the village has the right, and it has done it, I guess, previous years back, where, you know, the regulations in regards to the size of the apartments are greater. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, greater than the New York State, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. Some of our zoning requires minimum square footage, which is actually greater than the minimum square footage by the state code.
Correct. So the one thing that I do, you know, that's, you know, I had mentioned this before, and even we talked about this, and I don't know if the mayor remembers this. At some point, we did talk about, you know, increasing, actually not decreasing the size of the units on the counter of the cars, the way we count cars, because no one really has 1.5 cars. You know, what does that look like? A 1.25 cars. You know, what does that look like? You know, because you know, a couple of years back we were, you know, and this same project that, you know, we realized that they added an extra unit, you know, that we're not going to talk about which project it is, but we all know it. They also obtained a variance for parking because they didn't have enough parking on the property. You know, so that's something that, you know, we start looking into. It's like, what does that mean? What does that look like for us? Does the 1.5, 1.25, it actually, you know, makes sense? Should be, because now the more cars that go off on the streets, you know, the more difficult it is for people that actually, you know, for a brand new project that says I need variance for parking, you know, there's a problem. You know, then maybe we bring the units down. You know, where's the balance? So I think that's something that we were looking into. Maybe, you know, for one single family home, so we need 2 parking spaces. For a 2-family, you need 4 parking spaces. You know, so that's the ratio, you know, that we have. You know, that's throughout New York, my understanding is, and for what the projects or municipalities that I work. So I will not be in support of minimizing that portion of the 1.25. So I think, where's that balance? To me, it's more like, you know, those big buildings, we should increase that, you know, to match what one single family requires to be. You know, they require 2 parking. Then maybe that unit that is in an apartment building, you know, it should be a 2 car, you know, two instead of 1.5 or 1.25. So that's something that the mayor and I not seeing right now eye to eye, but that's okay. But I'm gonna stop right now because again, now is 9:39 and I've talked a lot, and I want the rest of my colleagues obviously to weigh in as well.
All right,
Trustee
thanks,
Lopez
Manny.
has very patiently been always raising his virtual blue hand.
Thank you. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quick points to make, and then 1 question. So brace yourself. So I want to start kind of least relevant to most relevant, okay? But that matters to me the most. So in the chapter, the second chapter of the comprehensive plan that you have drafted, that's about land use and zoning, you use the term grandfathered a couple of times. It's meant to discuss pre-existing non-conforming housing, but my suggestion is that you find another term because of the problematic nature of the term grandfathered. If you're not aware of it, Southern states in the 19th century created poll taxes and literacy tests and other ways to restrict the vote, but exempted people whose grandfathers had the right to vote before the Civil War. And that's where the term grandfathered came from. So given that we're a week away from Election Day, in the spirit of democracy, if you could remove the term grandfathered, for it no longer reflects our values. Thank you.
Good.
Number two.
That's fine.
Oh, please go ahead, Frank.
We were aware of that in the general parlance, Omar. It's not the parlance of planning. Planning, the grandfather term was just, you could have called it grandmother. It had nothing to do with the South. Planning was really not developed there, actually. But I understand fully what you've just said. We'll just refer to non-conforming uses. We agree.
Much appreciated. It seems like a small change. I think we can make planning more progressive.
Well, actually, just to add on to what Omar is saying, technically in terms for building departments, grandfather is not accepted because nothing is grandfathered in. If you've constructed something without taking proper permits, you still have to go through the process of legalizing it, whether it's legal non-conforming, because I have a lot of people that told me it was built 40 years ago or 20 years ago. It's grandfathered in, so therefore we don't need to get it inspected. We don't need to take permits. We don't need to legalize it. That happens to actually not be the case.
Right.
So I would have brought that up to your attention as well, to change that word to maybe pre-existing non-conforming, but not grandfathered.
Yeah.
It rolls off the tongue much less. I fully admit, nevertheless, but we can find something else. Number two, to Deputy Mayor Levin's point of why is this coming up? So the land use and zoning was the second chapter that you drafted, and it was drafted on June 9th of 2020. And the reason that I bring that up is because it's been on the website since June 9th. And one of the points that I made in one of our working committee meetings was the more that we can get the trustees to see what is in these chapters before we present the whole thing to them, the better, because there's a lot to digest. And for anyone to expect someone to sit down and read all of that content and then have cogent answers or questions to what's there is, to me, unreasonable, even if you do have a month or a month and a half. If you have 6 months of anticipation because it's on the website, then I will make the pitch again for my fellow trustees to please check out the chapters that are already there, because we're already talking about it in the working committee, but I'd love to have your thoughts as well.
Would it be helpful to provide a printed copy to anybody, any of the board, which we can print up what's available now and deliver it to Village Hall? If that would be helpful. Obviously, it is available online, and that would be the most up-to-date version if there are changes. But if the form of a sort of printed copy is helpful, we could do that.
Yeah, that would be helpful. There's a lot here to digest.
Beautiful. So for folks for whom that would be helpful, please definitely let Jaime know so that he can print out a copy and have that for you. I believe that every time a piece of paper gets printed, Suzie Ross sheds a tear, and so I don't want any paper, but that's just me personally. Okay, it is what it is. I respect the choices that others make. Number three, why is it that we hear about land use more than, like, we don't hear about you don't come to us saying, here are our thoughts on transportation or here or whatever. That's a chapter that was written, but I want to bring us back to the RFP, which has 3 parts to it. Number one is to update the 2009 comprehensive plan. Okay. Number 2 is to guide the village through an environmental review process as required by the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. That will sound familiar. We've been doing that. And then number 3 is a complete evaluation of existing zoning and potential update with form-based code and or overlays, right? So like we've asked whomever so helps us with this and the RFP, and in this case, BFJ Planning raised their hand to help us with this specifically. So that's where it originally came from. And then where do the specific ideas come from? They talk about the meeting with planning and zoning and everyone else. And there's been opportunities for the public to comment. Most recently, our most recent meeting was specifically a public comment period on all the chapters that have been written thus far. So we've had an opportunity to hear from the public as well on some of this stuff, but it is complicated, which I realize. But I did want to address that question or that point that Deputy Mayor Levin made. Number 4. So I think one of underlying some of the discomfort, recognizing that we've asked for help with this, is that there is pre-existing non-conforming means we have a set of policies or regulations or rules, and then people are doing some other stuff. And instead of having those folks conform with the law, we're changing the law to conform to behavior. And we don't do that with anything else. And so it feels a little bit backward. But at the same time, when 70% of the homes in the T district are non-conforming, at that point, when you're looking at the numbers, it only makes sense to update the zoning laws to reflect the reality of how people are actually using the zoning now, as opposed to when that zoning was originally developed. And I totally get that, but I want to name that discomfort that comes with the fact that we don't address things this way usually. My last point, my last comment is I've made this point during the working committee, but I want to emphasize it here. As I read through, in particular, the zoning chapter, this I think applies to other chapters as well, but particularly the zoning chapter. As someone that is not coming from an architecture background or has taken nearly every Lula course offered or is a village planner or whatever, right? I really, really benefit from the expertise of my colleagues. I'm coming at it from, a guy that's looking around, walking around. I don't really know. But as a result, I think I'm in some ways more representative of the community that's just going to pick this up and read it. And so I would love to have the level of detail that you have there is amazing, particularly for people that can understand sentences like, VC district and T, like all of that is great. But also if you can differentiate some of the sections, particularly like you already have summaries, but think about it as almost executive summaries of here's the problem we're looking to solve, here's what we're doing to solve it, or here's our idea of how to solve it. And like a super high level, if you imagine like Mayor Garrity's sons are very smart, if you could hand it to them and they understand it, they're in there's middle school, is that right? Yeah, they're in middle school. So if you can hand it to them and they understand it, I'm going to understand it, and many people in the community will. And I think that will get to answering Deputy Mayor Levin's concerns about who is this helping? Why are we doing this? Did this come from the plan 10 years ago, et cetera? Like just adding context to it for those of us that are not super deep in the work. And finally, my question, and this is something that I would love to see throughout the comprehensive plan, because you do have this in one section of the T-zone, but I'd love to see this much more, are examples. What if, or how about, a very simple example. So I would love for you to give a very simple example that me and Mayor Garrity's sons would understand, specifically of the MF3 zone and how it would work.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah. Thank you, Omar.
Sorry, I just had one question. And this, one thing that I always had asked, and I forgot to ask this. So when presentations like this come in, or any presentation that we could get ahead of this, at least 2 days before, for us to kind of unpack a little bit of the stuff and just maybe have some questions ready, or even like some people on like watching this, be able to kind of see it, it would be helpful for us to do that. So, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on something that Omar mentioned, because now, we're sort of what we have all these drafts, sure, and Joe and probably you guys have, in the planning world, there's some cheat sheets, and for us in the architectural levels, like we have a book that says, the key portions that we have to look into the building code, when you're doing, safety is one of the first things that comes up. But then, it's a cheat sheet where you can go back and look at, ADA accessibilities or things of that nature. So let's say, because we do want to, engage with our community to actually be aware. I do want to go down the street or go to my neighbor with a mask, obviously, COVID, situations and stuff like that. But I do want to have a conversation with him. It's like, do you understand what this means? Are you aware of this? So is there a way for us to create a document with all that information and put it into, compacted in something small and be like, this is the cheat sheet that we are looking at right now for the comp plan. It's like, these are the key items that we have. These are the talking points that you guys as the village board members could use to talk to members on the community itself, or just put it out on our website and be like, this is what we're working on it. This is the key points. What do you guys think? You know, we want to get some feedback, because, you know, we have to start thinking about outside the box. Sure. Like, how do we communicate a lot of these changes to the community at large? Because that's one of the things that, you know, we always, you know, let's say an MF3, you know, zone is created a year from now, someone down the street or up the area, you know, starts building and says, wait a minute, what happened here? Why is this guy's allowed to build all this stuff? And all of a sudden the neighbors start realizing, you know, wait, that is allowable, that is permitted. When did this happen? So then we hear, you know, in a few years, maybe 10 years from now, when I'm not part of the village board, but I'll be like, you know, wait a minute, why are you guys building that? It's like, oh yeah, we passed that, we passed that law when I was sitting down as a village board member, you know. So things like that sometimes, you know, I don't want to say I want to prevent, but I want to be ahead, and I want to be able to go to my constituents and be like, look, this is what we are thinking. This is what is it be possible. What do you think? I need your feedback. So is this something that you guys can put together? Maybe a couple pages, just some, you know, outline stuff that what the main points are, and, you know, create something as a PDF, and we can start, you know, putting that information out there, and maybe I can use that to have some other engagements with other groups of people that be able to, you know, kind of show them this is what we're working on.
So
Yeah, I think the answer is yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Jaime, go ahead.
yeah, Frank, I want to just kind of maybe jump in here. So in New York City, there is that red book. There's a red book that talks about all the zoning districts.
Yes,
and they
it's
have essentially what you're talking about, these one pagers, where it kind of shows you the setback and the view sheds and how tall buildings can be in that district and what they look like.
Yes.
And so on the one end, I mean, I think that that's probably something that is doable in as much as we're talking about new stuff and not, you know, every single district. If that's something that you wanted to do for every single district, then I think that's something that we you know, in the planning department, we could put something like it together, but it would take a little bit more time. One of the things that I found helpful for internally to do this is you know, I use SketchUp. I use SketchUp to just kind of lay out the massing of where things are. So if I have a lot, I can build the lot out. I can, you know, put the buildings next to it. You combine that with sort of the information you get from Google Earth about the adjacent building heights. And then you kind of take that in and you can sort of estimate even further than that using a calculator that I put together to determine what the potential taxes would be if it was, say, you know, an apartment building versus various other things. That's kind of helpful, like to workshop it internally. And so what I'm wondering is whether or not if there are specific areas of what, before you go out into a community to talk to people about this, that it might be helpful to do some of that, you know, background work leading into it. Because a one-sheeter is helpful, I think, but a more thoughtful analysis is not too far away either, right? So it's not that hard if you have at least identified the areas that you want to look at. So if you say, I want to look at Lafayette Street, I want to look at, you know, Spring Street between Broad and this, it's pretty, not super easy, but it's not super complicated to put something together based off of the parameters of the zoning district, right? So if you have a change to put that together, it could be done.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, and then again, you know, while we are all here, and I don't want to take, I know Bob hasn't gone yet, so I'm going to take some few minutes of his time. I'm sure Bob is okay with that, I think.
You can have all of my time. I'm still unpacking all of this right now.
Thanks, Bob. You know, the way I'm looking at things, sure, because I have the GIS map on my other screen, and I'm looking at different zones and what is that viable and not, sure. I think that's something that we have to look and consider as well. It's like, you know, are we trying to increase the density in different areas, and what does that look like? So that's something that I think we have to have a meeting in regards to what is that. Do we have that many empty lots? I mean, that's some of the people's concerns. Sure, is that many empty lots that we need more of this, or what does that look like? So I think that's, again, that could be part of a deeper conversation. I feel that, and maybe that's when, Jaime, with the calculator that you have created, could be helpful at that time. Right now it's just, again, I'm just throwing ideas out there, some of the questions, some of the concerns. I think that's more like the, hopefully I'm hoping this is kind of helping and sort of seeing the direction of what the board is trying to go with. I know there's a couple different directions, different opinions, but I think that we have a common path. I think. I hope you all got it, and then you tell me what the common path is, because I'm still don't see that yet. Just kidding.
Well, one thing I would say is like obviously the proposals that they've gone through today, and still the ones that are to come for the form-based districts, are put together, throughout the process, right? So my old planning teacher, who's sitting in this meeting, says, like, when I'm first taking that class, is if you have a district that has lots of variances, that has lots of, non-conforming uses, you should at that point realize maybe the zoning doesn't work for it. And so the places where the zoning is most challenging, where you have the highest percentage of non-conforming lots, are also the places where there was no zoning code in place when those neighborhoods were built, right? So the first zoning map that I have in my office is from 1930. And so there are whole districts, the S75 district and the T district in particular, below the VC district, as well as the S50 district, that, they were all built and almost entirely before the zoning code existed. So you just have tons of errors in the zoning code because it doesn't conform with that. And so I think that what we try to do is come up with solutions that may help to correct that. But of course, these are not, they can be changed, right? So if they don't make sense, then all these great comments help guide that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I guess we have talked about this. I think overall, I feel that we have to look. We have the map. You guys have provided with different maps, and I think the conversation from I want to say the Main Street portion all the way up to Corona Avenue, the last one that we did, with the form-based code overlay. I think that will be a different conversation, because that's a totally different delineation of what we are trying to do. There's a lot more businesses into that. So I think that's going to be a more, and I know Victoria wants to talk.
That's where we're going. That's where we're going. And I have a transitional question, which goes back to something that Manny was saying about the parking. And we want to be really careful if we're reducing the parking requirements, that might actually exacerbate one of our biggest challenges. But one of the things that we talked about, and we talked about it in conjunction with an overlay zone, but I don't know that it would necessarily have to be in conjunction with an overlay zone, is to establish a community benefits parking fund. And what I'd like to understand, and for you to give me an answer at some point. I know that that's something that has existed in other communities, but let's say somebody, wants to, get a conditional use permit to be able to have a 3-family in a T district, and they're going to come up short on the amount of parking that they need to have, that they can pay into, similar to what we have for when a new development comes in and they pay a fee for a rec fee, that they can pay a parking fee, and it goes into this fund. And then I'd also like to understand, and I think Nelson Nygaard and the work that we're doing with them, which is really focused on parking and transit, would probably be a good pathway for us to get some ideas of how to do this well. But then if the village is collecting all this money to invest in parking infrastructure, what does that look like? What does that look like in a 2-family zone that's going to actually address the problem in a very denser than originally intended 2-family zone?
Mayor, I think in perhaps another month to 6 weeks, what we're doing now that you've adopted the scope for the EIS, we're looking at how many units we're talking about and what that means for parking and traffic and school children. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Simon and I we were going over this in the office this morning, and that incremental difference that we're talking about is not a lot of units. we're really not trying to increase density in the 2-family zone. What we're trying to do is, as you know, Jonathan said, regularize it or make people, 70% of it is existing prior non-conforming, Omar. I just want to use that existing prior non-conforming term. And that's 70% of the units. So we're trying to make life easier, better for those people, you know, in the 2-family zone, and let people keep up their places and make that, help people in that zone. It is, we're trying to be people oriented in that sense. But downtown, when you, we get to Mark Evans in a few, downtown too, the change in density is very little. So in about 6 weeks, we'll have for you a draft EIS chapter on what that means. And, but what it gets to, Mayor, is that because you're not going to have a lot of units, you're not going to get a lot of money. It's going to be, and by the way, we're going to be talking more to Nelson Nygaard. And so I think between them and us, we could recommend perhaps a type of fee.
Okay.
But maybe Mark should go through where, you know, go through the overlay and then where that fee comes in.
Great. Great. And I mean, I can think of a few examples of if we had had that structure in place, it really would have been helpful because instead, you know, the land use boards don't want to obstruct the potential for what is otherwise, you know, perfectly reasonable development in the neighborhood it's being proposed. Like there's something on Spring Street in it, for example, which is a perfectly reasonable place to have a multifamily property with a mixed use component, but there's no way for them to get the parking. So the building on Main Street, that the infill development that we had, that Manny was referencing before, they just forgive them all the parking and we get nothing for it. And so we have, you know, just more cars and no way to accommodate for them or to invest in infrastructure to help accommodate for them. So it's been an ongoing problem. It's not just let's create something to address future potential development, because as you're saying, it's not actually that substantive, but there are just existing lots that are going to change. And so I'll stop talking. Tell me about the overlay zones. We're very excited at 10 o'clock and I really want to hear about this.
Well, we're turning it over now to our main speaker, Mark Evans.
Good evening, all. It's been great to hear your thoughtful dialogue on these topics. Clearly, issues of parking and conflicting principles and making sure that we are people focused and goal focused, and sort of with Jonathan's help, who's I think controlling the screen here, will move this forward and bring you an up-to-date from our conversations with many of you we had back in the first week of September. So the area that we're focusing on for this overlay is substantially the Village Center District and the Neighborhood Center 2 District. And so that's where we're focused on enhancements. Next slide. And so the 2 districts that we've agreed, and we've now called them the Downtown Overlay District, which is an overlay to the Village Center, and then the Croton Avenue overlay, an overlay on the Neighborhood Center 2 District. So those are all the sort of the areas where we're going to be focusing, and basically along Croton Avenue, Spring Street, and Main Street. Next slide. The goals are really first and foremost that this is an overlay. This is not changing the underlying zoning. It's designed to create a series of incentives to, and I think I would argue sort of appropriate incentives to encourage both sort of focusing on form and place rather than focusing on use, and that use is still important, it's still being regulated, but I think we've worked hard to make sure that the regulating of form is what is the driver, because we believe that creates for quality streets, quality walkability, enhanced economic sustainability, and an enhanced sense of place. And so I think we're going to focus on that. And we believe that this approach will protect and enhance the quality of life for people in neighborhoods, will enhance the quality and livability on streets where, in many cases over the last 50, 75 years, buildings have been demolished and left surface parking as on certain parts of Main Street and certain parts of Spring Street and certain parts of Croton Avenue. Parking has become a dominant part of the visual landscape, and there are ways that we can right-size that. And so the incentives that, big picture is allowing residential as a permitted use rather than a conditional use. And in certain situations, when an applicant participates in a community benefit fund and contributes towards that, there can be granted one additional story in both the DO district and then one additional story in the Croton Avenue overlay district. And so that revenue, to be determined, but really focusing on parking, civic space, and potentially schools. The exact destination for that community benefit fund to be determined by your board of trustees. And the main benefits that I believe are highlighted, most of them are the same between the downtown overlay and the Croton Avenue overlay. I think the main difference is that we see that creation of civic spaces in the downtown overlay there are unique opportunities for gathering places and for civic spaces and the kinds of things that draw people to come to a walkable district like your downtown overlay are the main differentiations. And in the case of both districts, certain restrictions on where and how we place surface parking lots are important. And in the downtown overlay, that sort of maintaining continuity of storefronts along commercial streets is a demonstrated way in which sustained value of storefront properties can occur when there's continuity of storefronts. And so a similar set of goals in the Croton Avenue overlay as well. Next. And just click to the next one. In broad strokes, what's now permitted as 4 stories and 48 feet in the Village Center District for those applicants that might opt in to this optional overlay in the downtown overlay may have the benefit of 1 additional story and 10 additional feet in the maximum building height, and the other benefit of going from residential as a conditional use to residential as a permitted use. Next slide here. And then the Neighborhood Center 2 district, the big picture is 3 stories and 36 feet. And with the potential bonus would be 4 stories and 48 feet, and the similar shifting from conditional to permitted use. So that's the big picture. And I think it creates this opportunity through creating incentive zoning to create a fund that could either be prioritized towards additional parking, additional civic spaces, schools. So I think we use the language sort of a public benefit fund. So next slide. And part of the way in which we are working hard to make sure that this is properly calibrated to your community, and I think we ran through this in a little bit in September, is that this concept of lot frontages, defining, you have such a marvelous collection of building types fronting along the street, but what you don't see pictures of on the screen right now is you don't see pictures of parking lots like you have in front of the post office. You don't see pictures of parking lots like on certain locations along Spring Street, or on Croton Avenue. There's a number of examples where those parking lots are sort of kind of marring the landscape of what would otherwise was historically a very walkable district. And so we've tried to identify the best of storefront frontages and professional frontages and neighborhood storefront frontages and stoops and porches and calibrate them with dimensions. And so we want to make sure that similar to our conversations about the T districts and these other districts that have non-conforming conditions, we're working hard to make sure that the frontage types actually match the real conditions, and that when and where new development would be permitted, it's consistent with these frontage types. Next slide. Down below, you can see these diagrammatic examples of these different 5 different types, and we've identified a few additional ones with subtle differences between them, but in general, these are the main types. And the one thing I do want to highlight is that storefront and professional tend to be 2 versions of the same theme, the sort of storefront with a little bit more glazing and professional with a little bit more of an office type front. The main difference in the neighborhood storefront is that the first 2 are largely within the village center district, whereas the neighborhood storefront is along Croton Avenue, where the storefronts are 4, 5, 10 feet further back from the street. It's a different character. It's a wider, a little less sense of enclosure and a little bit more separation. So next slide. And so, these typical conditions, what you see with the pictures below with for a storefront frontage, this is what we're coding for as one of the major frontage types. Next slide. And the stoop frontage represents that sort of typical kind of residential frontage, or it could be a mixed use frontage shown here with a number of properties along Croton Avenue. Next. And there's this other key concept that we talked about briefly, but we wanted to sort of highlight how we're recommending it move forward in the draft of this overlay. Would be, in general, when we're in a Main Street or Spring Street type, Main Street environment in particular, these sort of primary commercial frontages, in general, the buildings are close together. Maybe there's no space between them. And so we want to make sure that for new buildings in these districts, that they are good neighbors to each other. And one way that we can make sure that they're good neighbors in a commercial district is to make sure that storefronts are next to storefronts. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, a neighborhood street frontage, similar to Broad Street or other residential streets, having the building occupy 30 feet of that 100 feet, or at least 30% of that frontage, is a way that they can be a good neighbor to their single family homes nearby. So next slide. I think one of the things we talked about briefly, but is applied in this overlay, would be designating where parking should be placed to the side or to the rear of the property. In many of these districts, we want to make sure that the parking is, in fact, to the side or rear of the property. And in rare circumstances, we would allow it closer to the street, but would require landscape edging, fencing, and other ways of screening the parking from the street. Next. And so I'll just jump into a few specifics on the downtown overlay first, and that ultimately what we're doing in both of these, these examples of the pictures here, is that we're applying that architectural and urban form DNA of Main Street and Spring Street to this zoning overlay. And we're trying to make sure that we're picking the best examples of what I think we would probably all agree are the best of your downtown corridor, and making sure that other buildings nearby follow that same pattern.
And I would just make the point real quick here, if I could jump in. A lot of a comment that I've heard many times from many people is that half of Main Street got torn down. And so as you can see here, this is sort of like with the form-based code, you've sort of taken one side of Main Street, put it on the other side, and making it sort of consistent with each other. I think this is, you know, I never got a chance to see Main Street before it all came down, because I guess it happened probably before I was born. But this is kind of what I guess it would have looked like if we were to redo it.
You made a great point, and I think part of what we're trying to code for is to make sure that urban renewal, or what I've often heard people refer to as urban removal, doesn't end up becoming the norm. And so part of the intention, the goal, to be clear, is to make sure that we're creating dynamic pedestrian sort of citizen-focused streets rather than car-focused streets where off-street parking. So that is a good point. Next slide. And so the sort of the highlights of what we've recommended for your consideration begins with us going through and I'm going to just try and see if my cursor, I guess my cursor, let's see here. So making sure that the areas that are along Main Street, you know, here and here and here and here, that all of these locations along Main Street where the primary commercial street frontage is storefronts and professional uses and other uses that have those kinds of, you know, see and be seen storefronts where you can see into the store, you can see into the restaurant, people inside can see out. We want to make sure that that is protected, that that pattern is in fact defined as the new norm. And in most cases, as you can see with the gray buildings, that does exist. And so inside, along those red areas, what's primary commercial street frontage, we've said only storefronts and those professional uses are appropriate along those frontages. When we get to some of the nearby streets, the secondary commercial street frontages, which includes portions of Church Street, portions of Highland Avenue, portions of Central Avenue, we begin to allow a couple other types of buildings, but in general, storefronts, professional, and forecourts, some sort of courtyard style buildings. But we're, and then these service streets and greenways, you know, along your greenway here would be allowed. Go to the next slide. The other thing I want to highlight is that in general, in these locations, we've there is no setback from the front lot line, so the build-to line. It's 0 feet, and that sort of I'll call it that sort of zone where buildings can be meander between 0 and 5 feet, you know, from that build-to line. It's relatively tight. We don't want to have buildings 15 feet back from your neighboring building. I think 2, 3, 4, or 5 feet, you know, is not going to be a major problem, but we want to make sure that that sort of variability is as small as 5 feet. And as we get to some other building types where we might have maybe there's a, you know, on Spring Street, there could be a courtyard building that might have a center walkway leading you to a courtyard, having the building be 10 feet back and then having a 10-foot depth might be acceptable in those locations. Next. The other thing that we thought should be uniquely applied to the downtown overlay and probably not as much of a priority for the Croton Avenue overlay is to set a requirement that for those sites that are greater than 10,000 square feet, that we would require that a minimum of 7.5% of that lot area be designated as civic space, courtyard, a square, a green. And part of the rationale behind this is that far too many side yard requirements and rear yard requirements end up allowing someone to put 15 feet of side yard, which is, you know, a bunch of weeds in the side of somebody's property, rather than creating high quality, high value civic spaces that are along the sidewalk and facing the public realm. And so I think we want to encourage larger lots, you know, where there are sites over 10,000 square feet to build that civic space. And one of the things that we are recommending is that the Board of Trustees should be the one to set a fee in lieu, you know, if there were to be an applicant who, hey, I would really rather not build, you know, a 2,000 square foot plaza, your board could establish a fee in lieu so that maybe that however many $1,000 per 100 square feet or whatever you wanted to set it to be, maybe that could be a revenue that could be made available to dedicate to other civic spaces along Spring Street, along Main Street. And so maybe not every single site should have a 2,000, a 3,000, a 5,000 square foot civic space. Maybe there's benefits of having them consolidated around 2 or 3 major civic spaces in the downtown core, rather than having everyone build your own civic space. So that's something we think is worth considering. And I've got just, I think, 3 more slides, and then I think we're ready to move on to questions. Next one, Jonathan. And then wanted to just take a brief look at the Croton Avenue overlay, where once again, we've taken the time to study, evaluate, photograph, measure, and understand the architectural and urban form sort of DNA of Croton Avenue, with the goal being of preserving the character of the existing building forms, preserving the character of the civic spaces and yards in those front yards, and to make sure that we allow compatible development adjacent to these different characters. And so, yes, next. Yep. And so in this condition, you'll notice here that this neighborhood commercial street frontage, this blue line here, runs consistently throughout the length of Croton Avenue. The village center, just down the hill here, we have Village Hall. And so the plan here and the way in which the code has been written is to allow this deeper setback, sort of more neighborhood commercial typology, which has not 0 feet from the front lot line to the build-to line, but 10 feet, so that there can be slightly more generous setting. One of the things that is we've sort of put a sort of a fail-safe in to say, if for some reason the front lot line was put in some really illogical place, we want to make sure, and elsewhere in the ordinance, it says that, for example, from the curb to this build-to line, no building could be closer than 15 feet. And so I understand that during the walking tour that many of you were on in early September, that was something that seemed like it made sense at that point in time, and that we would also be designating that there would be some minimum sidewalk widths. Typically 8 feet or 10 feet in most of these commercial areas would be that sort of minimum sidewalk width. And so the So this shows that there's this 10-foot dimension, in some cases 20-foot dimension, shows that understand that the buildings could be placed, 12 feet, 14 feet, 16 feet, 18 feet, 20 feet back from the build-to line, and that would mimic the form and placement of buildings that is fairly typical along Croton Avenue. And so next slide. And so this, as we go further east along Croton Avenue towards Sherwood and Sherman Place, that similar pattern is allowed. But there are a number of properties, for example, between Sutton Place and Watson, where some of the homes and buildings in these areas are, give or take, 30 feet back from the sidewalk. And we want to make it clear that where that pattern exists, if some were to build, in between these, we don't suddenly don't want to have somebody saying, yeah, I want to be 5 feet in front, when in fact 2 or 3 of the neighbors are in fact 30 feet back. And so we've made some accommodations to the kind of unique iterations. We've also identified a hillside typology, as you're probably well aware. Many of the properties, as you go around the corner at Bellevue and Prospect and Watson, are quite steep. And we want to make sure that we have room for the 20 stairs it takes you to get up from the sidewalk up to the front doors of these properties. We need to accommodate these tight hillside conditions in a thoughtful and meaningful way. So I think it's just 1 or 2 more slides, Jonathan. This last one here. And so I think we've shown as an example here, this neighborhood storefront example where there's a sort of that deeper setback. And then the porch example here where we actually have that kind of front yard condition, and we're allowing for that. I think it's something like, another 10 feet front yard where that porch or that, could be projecting into the front yard. So hopefully I've, at 10:27 in the evening, given you at least a quick, overview of what we've recommended. And I would, I know, Frank, you had some things you wanted to follow.
I just had a final slide here just on next steps and how it gets implemented, sort of. Our real slide here on the draft zoning text. So you've got 3 things before you, which we have sent and we've also sent to Stuart for comment and review. The T district improvements, the MF3, and then this form-based code. You've certainly given us some things. We've taken a lot of notes, I think, on ideas for the T district and the MF3. So we need to incorporate this, from tonight and get back to you on it. We're hoping that we'll also share this, with the committee. They have a meeting on the 17th of November. And then after that, hopefully, we'll be able to get you a draft master plan, which would have these ideas in the plan so that if you decide to execute them in the zoning later, they are incorporated in the plan. And hopefully that plan will get to you in December, as well as the DEIS and some modified thoughts on these 3 zoning districts. Hopefully, in the meantime, we heard other ideas tonight. I don't mind doing, Manny's idea of doing a walk maybe in the T zone district to see how it operates, or maybe working with Jaime to develop a sort of little précis of some of those ideas in the T zone so that it's explainable. So we can take that all under advisement and try to follow up on this meeting. We have a next meeting, as I said, the 17th. So that's where we are right now.
So Frank, as everyone has pointed out, that it is getting kind of late, so I don't want to go into as much depth. And a lot of what you talked about tonight with the overlay zones, we have discussed and we had seen and we had done the walkthrough, but you did build on it tonight with some more specifics, so that was helpful. The suggestion of more field trips with the steering committee, and please let the full board know when that's happening, because we love field trips and it is very helpful for us to see tangibly how these ideas how they would come into play, whether it's the T district, or I'm still really interested in envisioning the potential for an MFF3 of where that would go. And I also am very pleased to hear that you're going to be bringing the recommended zoning changes to the steering committee, because I was a little surprised and concerned when you originally brought them to us on the Board of Trustees, because of course, and the zoning changes would come to the board for approval, but really this entire thing comes to the board for approval. And the steering committee, sort of along the lines of what Trustee Lopez was asking for, creating a document that is accessible to someone who hasn't dedicated either their career or a whole lot of time to learning about planning documents. That's really what the steering committee represents, is community members that are represent a diversity of experience in our community. So putting things in layman's terms might be a great way for them to be able to really contribute to this conversation. And so I encourage you to really make use of the steering committee for their input, as soon as is practicable in the process, whether it's for zoning recommendations specifically or for the comp plan, because they're obviously so closely related.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I have a lot of specific questions from what you showed us today, but it is late, so I'm not gonna just indulge in more of a conversation about land use. So I'll listen to what my colleagues have to ask or comment on.
Hi, thank you. I think the form base we have, as the mayor said, have discussed. It was great to see some of the sort of pictures, bring it to life. And I have to say that walk really puts it all in perspective. It's a really interesting concept for a village like ours. Again, looking at the total picture, not looking at codes per unit, but actually it allows you to look at a whole area and how that may move things. So I thought that was great.
Excellent.
I've seen this before. So this is, I can never see it too many times. Every time I learn something new, because there's so many, so much here. But I really appreciate this. Thank you, Mark. So I don't have any specific questions, but I want to just say everything that I said before also applies to this. And even more so because the walkthrough that we did really gave life to a lot of what you're talking about. The Walgreens, for example, having the parking lot in the front there. And like when you said that, like you could have the Walgreens up front and the parking lot behind it, I was like, of course. And if you've been to Mount Kisco, for example, that's a lot of how that is structured. You walk through such a cute downtown, the parkings, there is somewhere to park, but it's like behind the businesses. It makes sense. So bringing it to life, I think, is great, but I appreciate you presenting this.
Welcome.
I'm going to agree with that with Omar and everybody else. I think it's always helpful to visualize things, obviously. Something that we just have to keep in mind, obviously, I like, in form-based code, I still complicated stuff for me to understand. Even the more I read, the more complicated sometimes it gets, but I know it's simple, which is the complexity of what form-based code is. We just have to realize that, obviously we do have challenges in the area that was just talked about, the downtown and part of the Corn Avenue, because by you looking at the map, by just walking, is really just very specific areas that if we were to adopt form-based code, this will be adopted. There's not that many parcels that are empty, and I will not, well, I don't imagine anybody like Walgreens, sure. I would imagine that they're not gonna, unless they sell that building and some different corporation or different company comes in and they want to redesign their site, that will be the only time that, and if form-based code is adopted, that will be the only time that site will change drastically the look of that particular area, sure. If not, it will always be a parking lot in the front and the building in the back. But I guess my question is, in situations like that, because there are existing areas like that, is anything that we could ask, I don't want to say enforce, but we could ask them to increase the landscape on some areas, in situations like that? Is it an opportunity for us to say, look, you know, if you have to do a site plan review for some reason, for one way or another, we don't know that, but can we have an opportunity to add something in the language where situations like that will ever arise to the level that they have to go in front of the planning board? Is it something that we can take advantage of it and ask for more curb appeal on their parking lot surface? I guess that would be my only question, and we don't have to talk about that, but if, you know, we can talk about it, you know, on you update when you guys come back. But you know, that's something that I was curious to see, you know, how minimum of landscape, you know, characteristics are in some of these very inventive parking lots, I guess.
And just to be quick on this, but there are something called edging elements that I did not get into, but they basically say an ornamental fence, a hedge, a low wall, stairs, different things to define the edge. And we've within the draft overlay ordinance that we presented a couple of weeks ago in its full form, there are a number of design standards for landscape edge treatments that are that could be applied and enhanced to make the edges of these parking lots better neighbors to Croton Avenue, or better neighbors to Spring Street. And so I think there are ways in which, you know, that could be a series of incentives and a place during the review process where, you know, where those edge conditions could be applied. Clearly, right now, this is not changing the underlying zoning. This is an opt-in. And so, you know, I think it would really come down to at what point, at what threshold would it become a new land development application where full compliance would be required. And so I think, you know, that may be worth discussing in future conversations.
Correct. And I just want to add one thing, and I promise I won't ask any more questions for tonight in regards to this. So one of the things that obviously that I would like probably Jaime to take this portion of the overlay and what we are proposing in the downtown and kind of loop the Historic Preservation Commission, the HPC board, because, you know, through the years, we always had talked about, you know, even though the other side across the street from Main Street, half of that is not a part of the historic district, but it does have a relationship to the historic district. So I think that to me is very important to have those two zones to have a dialogue between each other. And that's something that we always have talked about is like, you know, I want the HPC to be aware of what's going on. I want them to be informed of this. So I think is, you know, if we can reach out to the chairman and kind of give them the heads up, look, we're talking about this. We have been talking about this particular district. This is what it was presented to the board on Wednesday night. We want some feedback. Can you please talk about it? I know they're having a meeting on the 2nd, I want to say, November. So maybe that could be next week. So maybe that could be an item, you know, I definitely have you ready to talk about that a little bit more in details with them. And, but if you can send them this package, both of them. And also obviously the link of this meeting. So some, you know, for them to be able to kind of watch the highlights or what this is. I know it's going to be a, you know, just something to watch after 9 o'clock. I think that's when we start talking about the zoning changes. But, you know, I think it'd be helpful for them and at least for me to get some feedback from their perspective as well, in regards to these changes or this proposed changes.
Good points.
Can I just ask one quick question, and maybe to Frank or Jonathan? It just goes back to something we were doing previous before this presentation by Mark. I'm just curious, when you had made the statement that about 70% of the properties in the T zone were non-conforming. I'm assuming that's combined with whether it's lot size or use, correct?
I believe so. I'll defer to Jonathan on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. We were given from the village aggregate data on the nonconformity. I think there was two divisions in that data. One was by use and one was by some what we call area, right? So yeah, that's combined.
Okay, so I'm just curious, like the use, like where did that data get generated from?
You're catching me a little bit of, I don't quite know, only that we received it. I have a feeling that I believe it's about a year and a half old. I believe I heard that an intern had worked on this for the village, and we were sent the output GIS maps and worked from those.
Okay. I only asked that question because, you know, over the years, and we come across this often, the fact that people over, say, the last 10 years converted 2-family homes into 3-family homes in 2-family zone districts, and they didn't go through any zoning, didn't get any variances for use variance from the zoning and so forth. If some of that data that you have in there that's saying about 70%, and then we're trying to come up with ways to basically what you're saying, legalize it. We're basically allowing somebody who did something without going through the proper channels to now be able to just say, if you go with this new comp plan, we're going to find you a path to legalization when they shouldn't have done it to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the, I believe it was the last planning director who put that data together, but I think most of the non-conforming really refers to the frontage, the bulk requirements. It's not really necessarily a use requirement issue. I think it was primarily bulk requirements.
Okay, that's why I was trying to ask what the 70% represented. That's all.
I think it's mostly bulk requirements.
You know, one of the advantages to if property owners have a path to legitimizing the number of units in their house and being able to do it and legalizing it is that we get to get in their house and make sure that if they have the space to be able to have 3 units that can safely house people and do it with the right parking ratio, that is much more preferable to some of the really dangerous situations that we have seen when we've gotten into people's houses from other, I mean, Joe knows this better than anybody, that there's some horribly unsafe conditions. So I think what we asked was for how can we, I mean, we've been asking for this for years since I ran for mayor, and now I'm walking away from it. And, you know, I mean, you guys have heard me complain about how do we address overcrowded housing? And, you know, first we wouldn't even admit that we have overcrowded housing. Now we admit we have it. And we understand it's really challenging. And we've actually made a lot of efforts from a legal perspective, updating code, making changes. I mean, Joe, your department has done a lot of work to really help bring things into compliance, but we're still, you know, coming up against obstacles to be able to get the overcrowded housing into compliance. So I would, I'm very receptive to potential solutions for us being able to get inside of homes that are designated as 2-family homes where we don't have the ability to get in there for a fire inspection, and we have to have the owner of the property be willing to let us in, because the reality is if they're operating right now as 4- and 5-family homes illegally, then they're potentially going to have to face some court problems. But if they could operate legally as a 3-family, maybe we could get in there and make sure everybody was safe and we were getting the proper tax revenue out of it. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges we posed, and this was one of the solutions that was brought to us, if I'm understanding what we were talking about with the T zone.
Yeah, no, that's correct, man. Correct. Fair understanding. Great.
Do my colleagues have more questions on either the overlay zones or anything we've discussed with BFJ tonight, since we're at the 11:15 mark? All
I
right.
do, but I'm gonna wait for another meeting.
Because you and I could just sit around and talk about this all night, right, Manny?
So we would just get started, you know? I got another hour and a half in me.
That cute little kid that we saw that face of, Jaime, he's probably going to bed by now, right?
He's asleep, yeah.
Okay. So you don't have any fun person to hang out with later on tonight anyway. We're all you got, right?
I'm just gonna put mine in writing because I sort of started with Joe's point. He just said it. I got to the point a lot quicker than I did. So, but I'll put in writing because that's the feedback. I think it'll be easier.
Okay, so I think we still have 2 items on our agenda, Karen. Given the hour, I know one of them, the events planning, is something that is related to a public hearing we're having next week. Do we want to hold off on the building department fee schedule, or is that something you want to do quickly? It's all.
So I'll defer to the board. The building, there are no real changes to the building department fee schedule, and there are some changes to planning, but they are things that we can discuss during our budget meetings. And then the event fee, proposed event fee schedule, we had talked about just being able to send it out, you know, with the local law and with the guideline book that Amy put together, resending it to the stakeholders as we prepare to, you know, hold the public hearing. So that is, you know, my recommendation is that we can definitely discuss the building and planning during fees during the budget meetings. And if you'd like to discuss events tonight, we can also hold those over for the planning meeting. I mean, the budget planning meetings too. So I defer to the board.
I think the BFJ team, we could say.
Yes.
The BFJ team,
Yes.
thank you very,
guys
very
are off
much.
the hook.
All right,
Thank you
very much,
guys,
everybody.
Thanks,
we really
BFJ,
appreciate all
folks.
the work. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for your input.
Good
Really
night.
appreciate it. Take care.
So Joe and Jaime, I don't know if both of you, but I know you're here now, which is why it made so much sense to do the planning and building fees right now, proposed schedule. But I think that I anticipate that the events discussion is going to be a lot more in depth than we'll be able to handle for much longer tonight. So I would suggest that we hold off on the building fee discussion until the budget meetings, if that's all right, unless somebody else feels differently, feels very strongly otherwise. Are you okay with that? Okay, we're all okay with that. All right, we're okay with that. Thanks, guys, for sticking around as long as you did. Oh, Jaime, I don't know if you, maybe you guys, do you still need to stick around for events? Anyway, well, you do, Jaime. I don't know if you
Do I will if you want me
no,
to.
I guess it's really a bill thing, right? We
No,
okay.
I mean, I think Jaime's up to the for events. So,
All right, good. All right. Well, then
I didn't stay on. I didn't have anything writing on that.
He said he's got another hour and a half in him.
I'm ready to do jumping jacks in here, man.
Listen, I'm up. Everybody's up.
Do some for me, Jaime. That's not happening over here. All right. So why don't we? I think I saw Bill. Yeah, he's lurking. He just doesn't have his camera on. So we should
Are these
Bill
not?
on and
Are
say
these
goodnight to
not?
Jaime and Joe.
These fees, are they not something that are discussed at budget season?
The
They
building
are
is. Yep.
yeah, all the fees are, but the fees for these are brand new fees that coincide with our event planning recommendations. They didn't previously exist. So we had sent the information out earlier. We can go through a brief presentation on it. It is based on information that you've seen before, but just as a refresher. And then what we, if there's a lot of questions and details, we can follow up, you know, and set up a separate meeting with board representatives or things and work that out so we can get it out too. But if you'd want to just so the board can understand the direction we're going in here, Bill's here, we can go through it now.
Great.
Clock is ticking.
Okay. Great.
I do want to,
Bill needs to mute one of his things because he's echoing, or everybody else's.
This represents, these fees represent a tremendous amount of work that we've done, that Jaime and Bill have done over the past year to create an event policy that is consistent, fair, and that aligns costs, not with we had sort of a all over the place random cost fees for some things, not fees for other things. We really wanted to streamline, facilitate events, but we really wanted cost to commensurate with the impact on village resources. And this was important because at a NICOM meeting, we found out that a lot of events, and as communities do more and more and more events, you know, the police time, the sanitation time, the recreation staff time, all constitutes what can be perceived as a gift of public service. And for a lot of events, that's perfectly okay when it's a very broad event, say like the fireworks or something like that. However, you know, as we do more and more events, some are more commercial in nature, some are very specific to very specific groups, and then you start really sort of getting an issue where you're providing resources that could be perceived as not necessarily benefiting everybody. So to really set it equal and just make a clean playing field, we set what we hope is a more streamlined approach. Again, a lot of work went into it. And when Jaime was talking to Wade Beltramo at NICOM, Wade made the comment that no, you know, village community, some cities have done this, but no village or has done anything like this before. And that, you know, if we're successful at this, they want to see us up in an NICOM presentation. So kudos to Bill and Jaime for really taking on what was an enormous effort, a lot of stakeholder engagement to get us to this point. And with that.
Bill, would you like me to share my screen for you?
Yes, please. Good evening, everyone.
No problem. Sorry. Where did it go? Hold on 1 second. Hope I'm not having the same problem I did before. All right, let's try that again.
I mean, you lost your backup.
I know I lost my backup. This is, I don't quite know what is happening.
Well, we actually all received it. So if we had to, in this case, we could all look in our email.
Okay. Bill, is that going to be a problem for you?
No, it's okay.
Do you want me to try, Jaime?
Do you mind? I don't know why I'm having these troubles. I've not had these before. Oh, wait, hold on. Here we go. Let's see. Because the last time I did it, they shut down.
There you go.
All
Okay,
right.
Awesome. Great.
All right.
Okay,
All right, here we go.
so we're talking about special events in Ossining.
Oh, I just.
Lost it. I'll keep going.
I'm sorry,
okay?
guys. I apologize. I don't know what's happening. Maybe if I mute. Yeah. Oh, thanks. There you go. Thank you, Manny.
All right. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So what we did was, the past history of events in Ossining is that the events have been supported a lot by the village services with DPW, police, rec and parks. We took a look at the events that occurred in 2019, and these are events that have historically been going on in the village. And we came up with a sum of the costs that the village was putting in for each one of these. And there's other events that go on, but these were the main ones. But so as you can see,
Bill, when you're talking about costs, you're basically talking about staff time.
It's all staff time, correct? And I think we shared this before, but we had $48,000 in just 2019 went towards special events. So what we did was we came up with the next slide was going along with what we had talked about a few weeks ago with the public law regarding special events and the process that we're going to be getting into to streamline the whole process and making it fair to all, is to come up with some fees. And these fees will be the same for all people. in all events. There will be a application fee, which is going to be a non-refundable $25 fee. There will also be a banner fee, and those are the banners that are hung on the 200 Main and also across Croton Avenue. We also took a look at the street closing of parking spots and looking to apply a $10 fee per parking spot. And this would be for those events that are held mainly in the downtown area when a street is closed there. We talked about 3 different levels for events, and those event levels are based upon the estimated attendance. And each one of those is going to have a fee associated with it. And as you can see, the level 1 is $200, and level 2 is $500, and level 3 at $700. In the next slide, what you'll see is we took the cost that we had in 2019 for the events that happened. We applied the level and the proposed fee along with an estimated street parking closing fee. And you can see what the fee would be to the organizer of each one of those events. And you can see just by the proposed fee, we've got about $8,000 there, which is about 17% that we're recouping back from the actual costs. And for if we apply the street closing, we get up to around 29%.
Yeah,
so that's what we're.
I just want to just be clear. So the street closing would be for metered spaces for paid parking. When we, so really Main Street and Spring Street are the primary, primary event areas there.
That also included the parking lot areas.
Yeah.
So like the Market Square parking lot area and the post office parking area.
Right.
What does multiple processions refer to? Where does the asterisk actually go?
So with St. Anne's, they have a lot of processions that go different spots. Some just go around the corner, some go down to Nelson Park and back. I think in 2019, they had about 14 processions.
So is this the total for all 14?
Yeah,
That's what was spent for 2019, for just 2019. They had a list of of processions for 2020, but due to COVID, they didn't.
No, I got that. I just didn't know so that's the total for 14. So it's like,
yeah,
all right.
and they range from level 1 to 3, depending. Some are very large, some are much smaller.
I got it. Got it.
Like 10 a year.
Right. So we're estimating that right there.
Okay.
Based on the size. So that really is the fee structure. What's ideal about this is that it's concise, and it is by the size of your event what your fee is going to be. You're going to know if you're going to want to close a certain section of Main Street. We'll know the exact number of parking spots that will entail, so we'll know what the fee is going to be associated with that. That would be part of the fees that the organizer would need to pay prior to getting their permits. And that is all I have as far as the special event fees, but I'm sure there are some questions.
You also shared with us a draft of the application. So are we going to discuss that as well, or do we just want to discuss fees first?
We thought that we would discuss the fees, the application. So the fees are we certainly can take input, but we really wanted to focus this discussion on the fees because we thought that we, if we want to go more into process, I think that maybe doing that as a separate meeting with representatives of the board probably is a more efficient way to do it. But we really wanted, since the fees are a really new approach to this, we wanted to run this by and get feedback.
I think it's a great start. Wait, are we up to questions or?
Go ahead, Rika.
Victoria,
Yeah.
Were you still talking with what we got? Oh.
No.
So this is just the fees to the village. Obviously, a lot of these folks pay other kind of fees, right? There are different kind of permit fees depending on the event you're writing in addition to this, correct?
If they had like a tent above a certain size, like those fees would still apply. And those fees typically apply now anyway. So if there needed a building permit or some, as you know, a stage or something like that, those would still apply. Depending, you know, they'd have to meet fire standards and safety standards. So that's would still apply. And if you go through the process document, it takes you through the steps so that when an event, you know, when the application and Jamie and Bill, if you want to talk about, sort of lists a checklist, and once you hit those triggers, then you're informed of, you know, what other fees may be kicking in.
It's the only fees that would be associated with the event outside of the event fees are really just the building department fees. And we're going to have, so what you received was the guidebook, and we found, you know, in researching many of the cities in the state of New York, as well as other communities across the country, they all had a guidebook of that broke down the legislation, that explained it in a better detail, so that it's not in that sort of language, I suppose, but it will guide people into what they need to do. So when there's going to be actually be a third permit on there that won't have a charge. So there's going to be block parties, banners, and special events. So when people go on, there won't be a charge for block parties. That's why you don't see it on the fees, but it is going to be something that exists. And sorry, my son's behind me. They'll be able to walk through the guidebook and see what they need. But when they go onto the community pass page, which is through the recreation department, they'll be able to, it will guide you through the specific questions that you would need to answer for, do you have a tent? Yes. And then if you click yes, there'll be a hyperlink that takes you outside of there into the building department forms page. So fill that out.
The Galata House price is relatively low next to the others. Is that because he does it at the park?
Yes.
So there's no parking and that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
There's like virtually, yeah, the amount of services he draws from that are significantly lower than some of the other events. And part of it is definitely the location.
Right. So they really only need a recreation person there to help them with garbage and, you know, cleaning the restrooms and such. That's really it. But it's a matter of having somebody assigned to that park for the day or for his period of time.
So using that as an example, based on the research that you did, or, you know, whatever analysis you did for 2019, it was determined that used $200 worth of village resources. I don't know how many people he thought attended the event, but it could be quite a few. So he could end up spending $500 in fees going forward, even if he's not using $200, even if he's only using $200 in resources. Is that what we're saying?
Well, if he believes he's going to have more than 300 people, including all of his vendors, then he would become an event level 2. And at that point, then it goes to the SEAC, which is the group that, if you recall from the discussion at our last work session, it would go to that and they would discuss what it is that's needed for them. So similar to like an OEM, where we would be able to identify what services are going to be needed to support that. But automatically, if there's more, it triggers it. If there's more than 299 attendees, it automatically becomes a level 2. There could be someone who does an event that only has 200 people, but they need like a procession. They might need police department. They may need public works. They may be crossing the highway several times, where it may be 6 hours worth of police department time. That being the case, it wouldn't be an event level 1. We have the discretion to make it a different event level. And that's all written into the policy as well as in the legislation.
So, sorry, what I was going to say with Galata House, with the park, the thing that intentionally or not, and if it was intentional, I think is very clever. You know, you looked at cost, but pricing is a strategic template. Pricing is something that organizations and corporations use strategically. So it seems to me, if we had another conversation, which we've had, of maybe possibly encouraging people to not use the main street, to not use right in downtown, to not maybe use the waterfront, for example, that may be I don't want to point to any one group because I don't want to be taken out of context, but there might be an organization that always has done it down Main Street for years, but maybe a park would work just as well. What we are saying in this pricing analysis, which by the way, I think is a great statement, is you could do it for X thousands over here because you're taking up X, Y, and Z of time, parking, etc. But if you went to this other location, we might be able to accommodate you for a fraction of that cost, and it still might be suitable for you. I don't know if that was intentional, but the way I see the pricing, that's the end result. And
It
I
was
think that is very clever.
It was intentional.
Good, then that was very smart of whoever intentionally put it. I think on the high end, we seem to be quite high, but the use of some of our parks. Now, look, people use the parks, so you can't just take over a park on a busy day when there are teams and all that and competition. But again, this gives people options to choose from with this group that could help them actually say, why don't we change it up a bit, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you use that? So I'm thinking about it a little bit more, but it looks pretty good to me right now. I don't know the enforcement part, which we've come back to over and over again, is how any of this gets enforced, how it gets adjudicated, what we're going to do with people who are bad neighbors, that they don't follow some of the rules or policies. What will we do? Those are, like, to me, the unfortunate hard questions. But looking at the pricing, I sort of get it. I'm still mulling it over, but I think, like, I totally get your strategy and what you guys are thinking.
I think it's also really important to remember that the village hasn't historically charged on a regular basis for events, and that this is really the out of the gate costs. And if you take a look, I believe it's like 17% recoup of the village's in-kind costs that we were putting out there. And, you know, I don't think that the goal is to recuperate all of what we spend, but to make it so that it has some sort of an impact. And I think that it will really be helpful for everyone to do that. And if for some reason it doesn't work, we can take a look at it again and in the budgets during next year to see if those, we may say, well, now, you know, the $700 fee, now we have all of these, you know, 500 person events that are, or 700 persons or whatever it is that are coming in. And now that all of these events are coming in, they're actually using more services than what we believe is worth $700. And then we can go back and take a look at that again. Also, Stuart wrote into the new legislation that's that you can review, and it's also written into the guidebook, that we can collect a bond. And that wasn't in there prior. I think Trustee Fritchie had brought that up. And I do think that having the opportunity to collect that, there's a lot of people that do great things. It might be that we decide that if it's a new event that's come to town, that we decide to do that just to make sure, because we don't know if they're a good citizen, like you were saying, Rika. We have great opportunities here.
A good neighbor, but same concept.
Good neighbor, yeah, sorry. I like good neighbor better. But there's an opportunity to collect that bond to insure us. Speaking of, we also have insurance that we're collecting.
I'd collect the bond routinely because people get it back if they clean up or they don't.
Right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make that even discretionary. I would just say, you know, you hand over a $500 check, we'll hand it back to you if you do it, whatever the number is, and we'll hand it back to you if it's good. And, you know.
That was my point all along.
Yeah,
we can
Bob
do
said
that.
it last time.
But that's something where it would be like the SEAC that can make that distinction for that they can say, because the Corporation Council will be in that group and say, we are going, you're going to do this, and these are your set fees, including for that is your refundable bond amount of.
Yeah, I know. I just like the whole point of this is consistency and fairness. That's what I'm saying. Make everybody pay the bond. Mm-hmm. And then the only discretion is, do they really deserve it all back or not? But you know, we're trying to minimize the opportunities for people to say you're not being fair, because we've historically been so terribly unfair.
Okay. Stuart, is that something we need to change in the legislation?
Not at this time.
Okay.
I have questions about the other document, but it is after 11 o'clock, and if we're just focusing on the fees, does anybody else have any questions? And by the way, I really like the. I think it was very well conceived, and I think the recognizing when parking is taken away, that is more of a burden, and that really is going to force people to be more thoughtful about, really where is the best, and maybe they'll decide it is worth paying for it, because that is they really want to take up Main Street, or they want to take up all of Main Street and Spring Street, or whatever. I think it's really well conceived, and quite frankly, it's very helpful for us to see that it still doesn't come close to the amount that the village is contributing. So it's really helpful having those numbers to make a reasonable analysis. Does anybody else have questions on the fee schedule or comments on the fee schedule?
I just have a quick question, I guess, and just like a general question that based on this, and part that we're not looking on the logistics of putting the planning guide that we have in front of us too. So one of the questions I believe Rika mentioned last time was to have a meeting with the stakeholders. Did that happen yet? Okay. So between the last work session and today, that meeting happened.
No. We wanted to, we had a big meeting with the stakeholders. What we wanted to do was have this, will go out to the stakeholders for review, so that they have it during the public comment period of the public hearing. Right. So we're not necessarily having another stakeholder meeting, but all of this is being pushed out to the same group, which is quite a large group, so that they can be informed and aware of the public hearing.
Okay.
So that would be the fee schedule, the proposed local law, and I think we also need the guidebook.
Yes, exactly.
Right now, I know it's in a draft form, but okay.
Yeah, so that would all go together, and then that way, they'd be, obviously it's a local law, but knowing that this is all in context, I think would be a good way. That was the point of this discussion and going forward. So.
Okay, I have a lot of things to say about the guidebook, but if we're not going to discuss that now, then we'll have more chances to discuss it.
What would be helpful on the guidebook too, if you have questions, if you have a moment to jot them down, we can incorporate that. And if we want to do that this week, we can, or next week, just get those, consider those as we're going through it and sending it out, to the public. We can do it in conjunction, or we can wait till we get the board's comment and then send everything out.
Nice job.
I'm okay with sending things out. Just as long as we're it's understood, like it says draft all over right now. So as long as we're understood that it's a working draft, then there's no reason not to share it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, no problem.
All right.
What else?
Exactly.
That completes our program for this evening.
All right, so can we get a motion to go into executive sessions for matters of
personnel regarding specific corporations?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at next week's hybrid meeting. Some of us will be at the community center. Everyone is welcome to join us virtually as well. This evening is adjourned.